Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, sir.
Very good evening. Hello. Can you
Yes, sir.
audible my voice?
Yes, sir.
Very good. On behalf Indira Gandhi National Open University, welcome to all of you. Myself, Dr. Ratnakar Mahapatra. Today, going to explain Unity 11. Unity 11 from the MPS-4 Comparative Politics. Today's topic name is Nationalism and Approaches. Today's topic name is Nationalism and Approaches. We covered in this topic what is nationalism, distinction between nationalism and the related terms, rise of nationalism and the features of national identity, approaches to the study of nationalism, liberal approach and the humanitarian approach, Marxist approach, integral fascist approach, anti-colonial approach, nations without state and the state without nation, globalization and the future of nationalism, etc. Today we will discuss in this topic. Okay. The topic name is nationalism. Nationalism is derived from the word nation, national and nationalism. Nation means to be born a particular place, derives from the Latin word nasi. Nation derives from the Latin word nasi, which means to be born. Nations, national and nationalism. Nationalism has been called the religion of 19th and 20th century as a way of thinking about the world. It emphasizes the importance of a nation in explaining historical development and analyzing contemporary politics, and also claims that national character is a preserving factor differentiating human being. Nationalism assumes that all human beings should have an and only one nationality, which should be their primary factors of identity and loyalty. This means that people should see themselves as members of a nationality and be prepared to make any sacrifices required to defend and advance the interest of a nation. As a doctrine of a universal applicability, nationalism claims that all the people should give their highest loyalty to their own nation. Nationalism claims to represent the will of the people to be able to decide upon their own destiny. Their will to be respected as a people to develop their culture and personality. During the last 200 years, nationalism has combined with the ideologies of liberalism, socialism, and communism and emerged as a winner. Everywhere in the world, nationalism comes first and other ideology occupy a second position. The national movements in the ex-colonial countries in the first half of 20th century and the distinction of a Soviet Union in the fag and 20th century revealed the powerful force of nationalism. Today, we live in the age where installed of a peaceful multiculturalism. Nations feel constant their nations feel constant threat of being annihilated. Nationalism provides useful tool for the preservation of the culture. This is all the more important when in the context of globalization there is an attempt at homogenization of all the countries. First of all, what is nationalism? Nationalism is a compound of many factors, some of which have their roots in human nature and many of which have a long history. Yet, yet it is a modern phenomena. To discover it is a difficult undertaking and the define in sufficient phases in even more difficult in one sense of the existence. In sense is the extension of a group which is the one belongs. In this sense, it is a form of collective egoism. In a negative sense, it is the manifestation of that fear of the stranger with its roots deep in human nature. First of all, I say about the what is nation. According to the Ramsamoyor, nation is a body of a people who feel themselves be naturally linked together by certain affinities and cannot tolerate subjection to others. Another definition of a burgess, a population of a population of ethnic unity inhabiting a territory of a geographic unity. Again, according to the Borges, a population of ethnic unity inhabitability of the territory of a geographic unity. According to the Lord Bryce, a nation is a nationality which has organized itself into a political body, either independent or describing to be the interdependent. Another definition of Professor Barker, Professor Barker said, nation is a body of persons inhabiting a definite territory and thus united together by the primary fact of living together on a common land. So there are so many definitions about the nations. The word nationals come from the word nation. After then the nationality, we understand the nationalism. According to the Geoffrey K. Roberts, nationalism is a ideology based on the premise that should be organized on the basis of nationality. According to the Alfred D. Grazia, nationalism continues to feeling of oneness, political unity, independence which weld with the people into a nation. Another definition of Ramsey Moore, nationalism stands for the historical process by which nationalities are transformed into political units to constitute a nation. सर्वप्रथम आम बुझा नेशनलिज्म नेशनल एंड नेशन नेशन रु नेशनलिज्म एंड नेशन रु नेशनल एंड नेशनलिज्म आसी अछि फर्स्ट नेशन कहले हम कोन बुझुची नेशन रो अर्थ होची जे लाटिन शब्द नेस्यू राशि अछि जार अर्थ होची जन्म हेबा बा टू बी बोर्न तेणु सीधा कहबा गले जो भूखंड जन्म नहीं ताकू आम जाति बा नेशन बोली कही थाउ रामचमोहन को मतरे केतेक प्राकृतिक संपर्क द्वारा निजकू आबद्ध बोली भाबुथिबा अन्यर स्वाधीनता को सह्य करि पारु नथिबा मानव गोष्ठी को जाति बोली कहा जाय थाए सेहि बळी बर्गेस को मतरे जन्मगत ऐक्य थाई एक भौगोलिक भूखंड रे बास करुथिबा जनता को जाति कहा जाय लॉर्ड ब्राइसिंग मतरे स्वाधीन हेबा आशारे एक राजनैतिक गोष्ठी रूपे निजको संगठित करुथिबा जातीयता को जाति कहा जाए साधारणतः आम जाति दुई प्रकार बुझी था जाति जरा नैरो सेंस आ गोटे ब्रॉड सेंस नैरो सेंस आम देर फोर वर्णज ऑफ देर फोर ब्राह्मण क्षत्रिय वैश्य शूद्र दे आर द इन नैरो सेंस इन ब्रॉड सेंस नेशन को आम ब्रॉड सेंस बोली कहता जो आम जन्म ग्रहण कर नेशन बोली कही था तेणु इन द ब्रॉड सेंस वी डिस्कस अबाउट द नेशंस एथरे कोन थाए साधारण वंशगत संपर्क थाए निर्दिष्ट जन संगठन थाए एकता संबंध रे चेतना थाए यह एक राष्ट्र नुहे यह कौन सी निर्दिष्ट भाषा पर निर्भर करी जन्म लाभ करी नहीं भाषा एक माध्यम मात्र बलिष्ठ आधार नुहे यह एक आह्वान अटे तेणु नेशन सीधा कहबा कहले आमे जो अंचल आमे जन्मग्रहण करिछु नेशन बा जाति बोली कहि थाउ नेशन शब्द रु नेशनलिटी तो प्रथमे नेशन तापरे नेशनलिटी को बुझाई थाए साधारणतः जाति अर्थ स्वाधीनता किंबा स्वाधीनता लाभ करिबा पई इच्छा प्रकाश करुथिबा जन समावेश को बुझाई थाए मात्र अन्य पक्षरे जातीयता एक आवेग द्वारा आबद्ध लोक समष्टि को बुझाई थाए nationality is a spiritual sentiment of a principle arising among a number of people usually of the same race residents on same territory showing a common language the same religion similar history and tradition common interest with the common political association and the common ideals of the political unity that is called the nationality एथुरु जना जाए जे मानसिक आवेगर समष्टि ही जातीयता यह भौगोलिक एकता सांप्रदायिक एकता भाषागत सांस्कृतिक जन्मगत एकता एवं अर्थनैतिक स्वार्थ और राजनैतिक मौलिक उपादान गुड़िक उपरे यह ही पर्यवेसित यह विशेष करी स्वतंत्र भावे जातीयतार एक समष्टि को प्रतिफलन गुरुत्व देता है जातीयतार स्वाधीन स्वरूप ही जाति स्वाधीनता हासिल निमित्त चेष्टारत मानव गोष्ठी को यह संगठित करिथाए जागृत राजनैतिक चेतनार प्रतिफलन ही जातिर गुरुत्व वृद्धि सहायक होइथाए तो जाति नेशनल एंड नेशनलिटी जातीयता विषय में कहूची जातीयतावाद जेफ्रो के रॉबर्टसन को मतरे जातीयतावाद एक दर्शन जहाँ जातीयता उपरे प्रतिष्ठित और संगठित Nationalism is a ideology based on the premise state should be organized on the basis of nationality. Alfred de Gracia को मतरे nationalism contributes a feeling of oneness, political unity, independence with wells the people into a nation. जो ऐक्य मनोभाव राजनैतिक एकता स्वाधीनता लाभ करिवार आशा लोक मानकु जाति रे परिणत करे ताहाकु जातीयतावाद कहा जाए रामचमोहन कहिथिले कि ऐतिहासिक प्रक्रिया द्वारा जातीयता राजनैतिक संगठन रूपांतरित हुई जो जाति गठन करे ताहाकु जातीयतावाद कहा जाए Nationalism stands for the historical process by which nationalities are transformed into political units to constitute a nation. ଏଥିରୁ ଆମେ ଯାହା ଜାଣିବାକୁ ପାଇଲେ କି ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ଏକ ଐତିହାସିକ ପ୍ରକ୍ରିୟା ଏବଂ ଜାତୀୟତାକୁ ଜାତିରେ ପରିଣତ କରିବା ନିମିତ୍ତ ଏକ ବଳିଷ୍ଠ ଭାବନା ବା ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ଅଟେ। ଏହା ଦେଶ ପ୍ରୀତି ବୁଦ୍ଧି କରିବାରେ ଯେତିକି ସହାୟକ ହୁଏ, ଶତ୍ରୁ ପ୍ରତି ସେତିକି ସନ୍ଦେହ ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରେ। ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ଲାଭ କରିବା ପାଇଁ ଏହା ଦୃଢ଼ ମନୋଭାବ ପରିପ୍ରକାଶ କରେ। ନିଜ ଚତୁଃପାର୍ଶ୍ୱରେ ଘେରି ରହିଥିବା ପ୍ରାକୃତିକ ପରିବେଶ, ଜନ୍ମଭୂମି, ଜନ୍ମମାଟି ଏବଂ ପରିବାର ପ୍ରତି ଆତ୍ମବିଭର ଦୃଢ଼ ସ୍ୱରୂପ ହିଁ ଆମେ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ବୋଲି କହିଥାଉ। ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ଏକ ମହାମନ୍ତ୍ର ଯାହାକି କୋଟି କୋଟି ନରନାରୀଙ୍କୁ ଏକତ୍ରିତ କରିବାରେ ସକ୍ଷମ ହୋଇଥାଏ। ଆତ୍ମିକ ପ୍ରୀତି ବଢ଼ାଇବାରେ ଏହା ହେଉଛି ଏକ ବଳିଷ୍ଠ ଉପାଦାନ। ଜାତୀୟତାର ଦୃଢ଼ ରୂପାନ୍ତରିତ ଅବସ୍ଥା ହିଁ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ। ଏଥିରେ ବିଶେଷ ଉପାଦାନ ଗୁଡ଼ିକ ହେଲା ଭାଷା, ଲାଙ୍ଗୁଏଜ, ଧର୍ମ, ରିଲିଜିଅନ, ସଂସ୍କୃତି, କଲଚର, ଭୌଗୋଳିକ ଐକ୍ୟ, ଜିଓଗ୍ରାଫିକାଲ ୟୁନିଟି, ବରିଷ୍ଠ ନେତୃତ୍ୱ, କରିସ୍ମାଟିକ ଲିଡରସିପ, ଅର୍ଥନୈତିକ ଉଦ୍ଦେଶ୍ୟ, ଇକୋନୋମିକ ପର୍ପୋଜେସ୍, ସାଧାରଣ ଆଦର୍ଶ, କମନ ଆଇଡିଓଲୋଜି, ଏହି ସବୁ ଜାତୀୟତା ପାଇଁ ଏକ ଭାବନା ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରିଥାଏ। ତେବେ ଆମେ ଯିବା ଆସ distinction between the nationalism and the related terms. In order to examine the political character of a nationalism, a basis conceptual distinction has to be made between nation state, and nationalism. The term state is a legal institution and usually refers to a human community that claims the monopoly of the legitimate use of the physical force within a given territory. On the other hand, nation is a human group of conscious of forming a community, sharing a common culture, attached to clearly demarcated territory, having a common past and a common project for the future, and claiming the right to the rule itself. A nation includes five dimensions. That psychological, cultural, territorial, political, and historical. By the term nation state is meant the formation of a kind of a state which has the monopoly of a legitimate use of force and which seeks to unity its people by means of homogeneous creating a common culture, symbols, values, traditions, and myth of the origin. Again, by the term nation state means the formation of a kind of a state which has the monopoly of a legitimate use of the force and which seeks to unity of a people by means of a homogenization, creating a common culture, common symbols, values, traditions, and myth of the origin. Nationalism is a sentiment of belonging to a community whose members identify with a set of symbols, beliefs and way of life, and has the will to decide upon their common political destiny. Now, kinds of nationalism. Kinds of nationalism. First one, liberal nationalism, conservative nationalism, expansionist nationalism, anti-colonial nationalism. There are four types of nationalism. First one, उदारवादी जातीयतावाद. उदारवादी जातीयतावाद एक स्वतंत्र जातीयतावाद जहाँकि फरासी विप्लव आरंभ होता. 19वीं शताब्दीर मध्य भाग यूरोप रे जातीयतावादर परिसर स्पष्ट भाव में सृष्टि करथिला. जातीयतावादी हेले उदारवादी हेबाकू पड़िबो, जोटा कि 1848 ମସିହା 1848 ମସିହାରେ ବିପ୍ଳବ ଜାତୀୟ ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ପ୍ରତିଷ୍ଠା ସହ ସୀମିତ ସାମ୍ବିଧାନିକ ସରକାର ପ୍ରତିଷ୍ଠାରେ ସହଯୋଗ କରିଥିଲା। ପ୍ରତ୍ୟେକ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରରେ ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ଏବଂ ଆତ୍ମନିର୍ଭରର ଅଧିକାର ରହିଛି। ସବୁ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ସମାନ। ଏହାର ପରମ ଲକ୍ଷ୍ୟ ହେଉଛି ବିଶ୍ୱ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ପ୍ରତିଷ୍ଠା କରିବା। ଏଥିରେ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତିର ପ୍ରାଧାନ୍ୟ ସର୍ବତ୍ର ସମାନ। ଏଥିରେ ମାନବିକ ଅଧିକାରକୁ ସୁଦୃଢ଼ୀଭୂତ କରାଯାଇଛି। ସାର୍ବଜନୀନବାଦକୁ ଏହା ଯଥେଷ୍ଟ ପ୍ରାଧାନ୍ୟ ଦେଇଛି। ତାହା ହିଁ ହେଉଛି ଉଦାରବାଦୀ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ। ନମ୍ବର 2 କନଜରଭେଟିଭ ନ୍ୟାସନାଲିଜିମ ବା ରକ୍ଷଣଶୀଳ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ। ଉଦାରବାଦୀ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ପରେ ଯେଉଁ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହେଲା ତାହା ହେଉଛି ରକ୍ଷଣଶୀଳ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ। ବିଶେଷ କରି ଏହା ଇଂଲଣ୍ଡରେ ହିଁ ଆରମ୍ଭ ହୋଇଥିଲା। ଏହାର ଫାଦର ହେଉଛନ୍ତି ଏଡମଣ୍ଡ ବର୍ଗ। 1982 ମସିହାରେ ବ୍ରିଟିଶ ପ୍ରଧାନମନ୍ତ୍ରୀ ମାର୍ଗାରେଟ ଥାଚର ଫକଲ୍ୟାଣ୍ଡ ଯୁଦ୍ଧରେ ବିଜୟ ଘୋଷଣା ପରେ ୟୁରୋପୀୟ ସ୍ୱତନ୍ତ୍ରବାଦ ରକ୍ଷଣଶୀଳତାର ପରିସର ମଧ୍ୟରେ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦର ଅଭିବୃଦ୍ଧି ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରିଥିଲେ। ଠିକ୍ ସେହିପରି ରେଗାନଙ୍କ ଗ୍ରୀନବାକ୍ ଆକ୍ରମଣ, ଲିବିଆ ଉପରେ ବୋମାମାଡ଼, ଜର୍ଜ ବୁଶଙ୍କ ପାନାମା ଆକ୍ରମଣ ଏବଂ 1991 ମସିହାରେ ଉପସାଗର ଯୁଦ୍ଧ ଏହି ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦର ଜ୍ୱଳନ୍ତ ଉଦାହରଣ ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରିଛି। ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ଏକ ଦେଶାତ୍ମକ ବୋଧ, ଜାତୀୟ ଭାବନା ଐତିହାସିକ ପୃଷ୍ଠାରୁ ଖୁବ୍ ରୁଦ୍ଧିମନ୍ତ କରିଥାଏ। ପାରମ୍ପରିକ ଚେତନାରେ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ପ୍ରତିଷ୍ଠା କରିବା ନିମିତ୍ତ ରକ୍ଷଣଶୀଳ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ସୃଷ୍ଟି। ତୃତୀୟ ହେଲା ବିସ୍ତାରବାଦୀ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ବା ଏକ୍ସପାନ୍ସିନିଷ୍ଟ ନ୍ୟାସନାଲିଜିମ। ଏହା ଉଗ୍ର ସାମରିକ ଏବଂ ବିସ୍ତାରବାଦୀ ଚରିତ୍ରରେ ପର୍ଯ୍ୟବେସିତ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦର ଏକ ନମୁନା। ଏହା ଉଦାରବାଦୀ, ସମାନ ଅଧିକାର ଏବଂ ଆତ୍ମନିର୍ଭର ନୀତିର ବିରୁଦ୍ଧାତ୍ମକ ଚିନ୍ତନ ଉପରେ ପର୍ଯ୍ୟବେସିତ ଅଟେ। ସଂହତି ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ଫରାସୀ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦୀ ଚାର୍ଲସ ମୋରସଙ୍କ ପ୍ରଥମେ ଏହା ବ୍ୟବହାର କରିଥିଲେ। ଏଠାରେ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ହିଁ ସର୍ବସ୍ୱ, ମାତ୍ର ବ୍ୟକ୍ତି କିଛି ନୁହେଁ। ବ୍ୟକ୍ତିର ଜୀବନ ମୂଲ୍ୟବାନ ହୁଏ ଯେତେବେଳେ ସାମଗ୍ରିକ ଚେତନାରୁ ଏହି ଜାତି ଉଦ୍ଦେଶ୍ୟରେ ଜାଗ୍ରତ କରେ, ମାତ୍ର ଏହା ମୂଲ୍ୟବାନ ହୁଏ ଯେତେବେଳେ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତିର ସଂକୀର୍ଣ୍ଣ ଜୀବନରେ ଏହା ବ୍ୟବହୃତ ହୁଏ। ନମ୍ବର 4 ଆଣ୍ଟି କଲୋନିଆଲ ନ୍ୟାସନାଲିଜିମ ବା ଉପନିବେଶ ବିରୋଧୀ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ। ବିକାଶୋନ୍ମୁଖୀ ବିଶ୍ୱର ଅନେକ ପ୍ରକାର ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ଦେଖାଯାଇପାରେ। ତନ୍ମଧ୍ୟରୁ ଉପନିବେଶବାଦ ବିରୁଦ୍ଧରେ ସଂଗ୍ରାମ ଜାରି ରଖି ଏହି ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ପ୍ରତିଷ୍ଠା କରାଯାଇଥାଏ। ଏହା ପ୍ରଥମେ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ବା ଜାତି ଗଠନରେ ସହାୟକ ହୁଏ। ବ୍ରିଟେନ, ଫ୍ରାନ୍ସ, ନେଦରଲ୍ୟାଣ୍ଡ ଏବଂ ପର୍ତ୍ତୁଗାଲର ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦୀ ଚେତନାରୁ ଏହି ବିରୋଧୀ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ସ୍ୱୀକୃତି ଲାଭ କରିଥିଲା। ଭାରତ 1947 ମସିହା ଏବଂ ଚୀନ 1949 ମସିହାରେ ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ହାସଲ କରିଥିବା ଉପନିବେଶୀ ବିରୋଧୀ ଆନ୍ଦୋଳନ କରି ଏକ ନମୁନା ଅଟେ। ଉପନିବେଶ ବିରୋଧୀ ଭାବ ଅନେକ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରରେ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦର ବାସ୍ତବ ସ୍ୱାଧୀନ ମନୋଭାବରୁ ଯଥେଷ୍ଟ ଜାଗ୍ରତ ହୋଇଛି। Now, characteristics of nationalism. Characteristics of nationalism. First one, apart from the political aspect of nationalism as a modern phenomenon rising with the national state, the big question is what creates a national identity. The other words, along with the certain national development, there are less rational but not less important areas concerned with the creating feeling and emotions. According to Guibernu, he stated that there are three factors which help in the creation of a national identity. It is developed of printing and creation of vernacular languages, relationship between the national identity and culture, common symbols and rituals that are the main features of the nationalism. The development of vernacular languages after the invention of printing press in Europe played a decisive role of the creating sense of belonging to a community. Printing press is a very important feature of our nationalism. Before press, the peoples are used the manuscript or handwriting newspapers, etc. National consciousness is divided from the shared value, traditions, and memories within the particular culture, which is thought and spoken in a particular language. Though vernacular is not an indiscernible basis of the creation of a nation consciousness, yet does not facilitate that creations. We are nation and state, we are coexistence. Education and the generalization of literacy not only reinforced with the possibility of a communication through the people, but also the help in the development of a strong sense of a community. Secondly, the key question with the regard of a national identity is who am I? Everyone can question about this nationality. Who am I? Identity is in the interpretation of the self-established. What and where a person is both socially and psychologically. The answer will come. I am Indian. I am American. I am Pakistani. So this is the identity of a person or a community. Thirdly, in the creation of a nationality identity, a powerful role is also played a symbol and the rituals. Nation is a community which has a similarity within itself and differences from other. The consciousness of a forming community is created through the use of symbols and repetitions of a ritual and give strength to the individuals members of a community by favoring occasion in which they feel united and by displaying symbols that represent in unity. A nation establishes the distinction from others. Example, for example, a soldier who for his flag dies so that because he identifies his flag with the country. We are we are pasting Indian national flag every national items like aeroplane, train, ships, because the other countries people will showing that belongs is where from India. So it is the identity of Indians by the national flag. So every countries are pasting or using the national flag for the national identity. The next point, approaches to the study of nationalism. First, humanitarianism approaches. Liberal humanitarian approaches to nationalism. It was the earliest kind of a formal nationalism and is found in the writing of Bolingbroke, Rousseau, Hedor, Fichte, Magin, etc. According to Herder, mankind is divided by the nature and by region which is the separate nationalist, and it is the through cultivation of the particular genuine of the nationality that both the individual and the humanity as a whole make a progress towards the perfections. Each national organ has its own the particular individuality, a gift of nature, and it is the duty of the individual who are part of the organism to cultivate that particular genius. Nationalities are distinguished from the another by the historical traditions, by the possession of their own language, own literature, system of education, custom, and in well-developed nationality by the possession of a national soul. But but what is the important to note here is that this sort of nationalism did not preach superiority of one nation over the other hand. This nationalism was a political. The human race, the human race had the roots again is one whole. We work and suffer, sow and harvest each for all. This happiness of one nation cannot be forced upon the another. Each must seek and find its happiness in its own way. Above all, nations stands the ideal of humanity as a goal and a guiding principle, a potentiality to be developed and cultivated. He opposed imperialism and war of conquest for the purpose of nationality. It is irrational despotism that seeks to bring peoples of different nationalities under one rule. As a liberal and nationalist, Harder welcomed the French Revolution and saw in it the fruition of enlightenment. The second approach is the expansionist approach, विस्तारवादी जातीयतावाद. Contrary to the vision of thinkers like Margin, that the war of liberation would result in the achievement of unity and independence for the nationalities. The victories in the liberal wars brought about in the very evils which they are supposed to destroy. Rather, they become the furious and continuous of wars more destructive and extensive than before. National unification and democracy intensified intentional antagonism and made the broad mass of people actively participate in them. ଏହା ଏକ ଉଗ୍ର ସାମରିକ ଏବଂ ବିସ୍ତାରବାଦୀ ଚରିତ୍ରରେ ପର୍ଯ୍ୟବେସିତ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦର ଏକ ନମୁନା। ବିସ୍ତାରବାଦୀ ହେଉଛି ଏକ ପର୍ଯ୍ୟବେସିତ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦର ଉଦାହରଣ ଅଟେ। ଏହା ଉଦାରବାଦୀ ସମାନ ଅଧିକାର ଏବଂ ଆତ୍ମନିର୍ଭର ନୀତିର ବିରୁଦ୍ଧାତ୍ମକ ଚିନ୍ତନ ଉପରେ ପର୍ଯ୍ୟବେସିତ ହେଉଛି ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ଅଟେ। ଏଠାରେ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ହିଁ ସର୍ବସ୍ୱ ମାତ୍ର ବ୍ୟକ୍ତି କିଛି ନୁହେଁ। ବ୍ୟକ୍ତିର ଜୀବନ ମୂଲ୍ୟବାନ ହୁଏ ଯେତେବେଳେ ସାମଗ୍ରିକ ଚେତନକୁ ଏକ ଜାତୀୟ ଉଦ୍ଦେଶ୍ୟରେ ଜାଗ୍ରତ କରିଥାଏ। ମାତ୍ର ଏହା ମୂଲ୍ୟହୀନ ହୁଏ ଯେତେବେଳେ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତିର ସଂକୀର୍ଣ୍ଣ ଜୀବନରେ ଏହା ବ୍ୟବହୃତ ହୁଏ। ସାମରିକ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ଅତି ସ୍ୱଦେଶ ଅନୁରାଗୀ ବିଶ୍ୱାସ ସୂତ୍ରରେ କାର୍ଯ୍ୟକାରୀ ହୋଇଥାଏ। ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରଗୁଡ଼ିକର ଗୁରୁତ୍ୱ ଗୋଷ୍ଠୀବାଦ ଓ ଜାତିବାଦ ଏବଂ ମୌଳିକ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ଉପରେ ପ୍ରତିଫଳିତ ହୋଇଥାଏ। ଏଥିପାଇଁ ଭାଷା ସଂସ୍କୃତି ଉପରେ ଅଧିକ ଗୁରୁତ୍ୱ ଦିଆଯାଇଥାଏ। ଅତ୍ୟଧିକ ସ୍ୱଦେଶ ଅନୁରାଗୀ ଭାବନା ଏହି ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦର ମୂଳ ଆଧାର ଅଟେ। ଫାଶୀବାଦ ଏହାର ଜ୍ୱଳନ୍ତ ଉଦାହରଣ, କାହିଁକି ନା ସେମାନେ ଦେଶକୁ ଏତେ ମାତ୍ରା ଭଲ ପାଉଥିଲେ ଯେ କି ଏହାକୁ ଉଗ୍ର ଜାତିବାଦ ବା ଉଗ୍ର ରୂପ ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରିଥିବାର ଦେଖିବାକୁ ମିଳିଥାଏ, ଯାହା ଦ୍ୱାରା କି ସେକେଣ୍ଡ ୱାର୍ଲଡ ୱାର ଏହାକୁ ନିମନ୍ତ୍ରଣ କରିଥିଲା। Next approach is the Marxist approach. The idea for nationalism and the nation state had a different continuation in the Marxian. Karl Marx declared that the societies were divided not on nationalities but on class basis. The purpose of the state is the protection of a vested interest of the dominant class and such as the state does not represent the nationality but the class interest. Writing about the own time, Karl Marx emphasized that although the capitalist liberal state like of a national interest, industrialization has created a working class which has a universal interest irrespective of nationality. As a result of which the concept of nationality is almost dead in industrial countries. It is a fiction created by the bourgeois class and being used by it just as used religion, ethics, democracy, freedom, science, art or literature. Karl Marx said, the working class has no nation. It has a universal class interest. The salvation of the working class led in the development, a productive performance on the good scale which was not possible in the narrow sphere of a nation state. କାଲମାସଙ୍କ ମତରେ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ସେଇମାନଙ୍କ ପାଖରେ ଥାଏ ଯେଉଁମାନେ ବର୍ଜସ୍ ଗୋଷ୍ଠୀ, ଯେଉଁମାନେ ରିଚ୍ ପିପୁଲ, ଯେଉଁମାନଙ୍କ ପାଖରେ ଅତ୍ୟଧିକ ସମ୍ପତ୍ତି ବା ଧନ ରହିଛି, ପୁଞ୍ଜିପତି ମାନଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ଆବଶ୍ୟକ ରହିଥାଏ। ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ଏକ ଜଗଳି ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ବା ପୁଲିସ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ଭାବେ ତାଙ୍କୁ କାର୍ଯ୍ୟ କରିଥାଏ। ସେମାନଙ୍କର ଧନ ଜୀବନ ସୁରକ୍ଷା କ୍ଷେତ୍ରରେ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ଭୂମିକା ଗୁରୁତ୍ୱପୂର୍ଣ୍ଣ ରହିଥାଏ। କିନ୍ତୁ ସର୍ବହରା ଗୋଷ୍ଠୀ ବା ଦରିଦ୍ର ଗୋଷ୍ଠୀଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର କୌଣସି ଆବଶ୍ୟକତା ନାହିଁ ବୋଲି କାଲମାର୍କ୍ସ କହିଛନ୍ତି। କାରଣ ନଥିଲା ବାଲାଙ୍କର ନା ସମ୍ପତ୍ତି ଅଛି, ନା ଘର ଦ୍ୱାର ଅଛି, ନା ଭବିଷ୍ୟତ ପାଇଁ ତାଙ୍କର କିଛି ଧନ ସାଇତି ରହିଛି। ତେଣୁ ସେଥିପାଇଁ ତାଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର କୌଣସି ଆବଶ୍ୟକତା ନାହିଁ ବୋଲି କାଲମାର୍କ୍ସ ଉଲ୍ଲେଖ କରିଛନ୍ତି। Karl views on nationalism is an expression of the bourgeois interest. As he wrote, he bourgeois conventions assumed that the nation consists only of capitalists. The country was therefore theirs. He argues that the bourgeois as a class had a common interest, and this community of interest which is directed against the proletariat inside of the country and is directed against the bourgeois of other nations outside the country. This is the bourgeois is called the nationality. In the German ideology about the nationalism, Karl Marx referred to the proletariat as a class unlike are a class which no longer counts as a class in the society, is not recognized as a class, and is in itself the expression of the resolution of all classes and nationalities within the present society. In the modern capital society, the more proletariat spends his life working, the more he is improvenist. ଆଧୁନିକ ସମାଜରେ ଦିନକୁ ଦିନ ସର୍ବହରା ବା ଗରିବ ସଂଖ୍ୟା ବୃଦ୍ଧି ପାଇବାରେ ଲାଗିଛି, ଯେଉଁମାନେ କି ୱାର୍କିଂ ପିପୁଲ ଭାବରେ ଜୀବନ ଅତିବାହିତ କରୁଛନ୍ତି। ଗ୍ରାମାଞ୍ଚଳରେ କୃଷକ ଭାବେ କିମ୍ବା ସହରାଞ୍ଚଳରେ ଦରିଦ୍ର ଲେବର ଭାବେ ତାଙ୍କର ଜୀବନ ଅତିବାହିତ ହେବାକୁ ଲାଗୁଛି। Another approach, integral approach, according to the fascism, integral approach of a fascist. In the 19th century, nationalism contributed to the liberation and the emancipation movement. At the time, it was a progressive doctrine inseparably connected with democratic universality values ethnical from the French Revolution. ଫରାସୀ ବିପ୍ଳବ ସମୟରେ ଫରାସୀ ବାସୀ ମାନେ ଏକତ୍ରିତ ହୋଇଥିଲେ। ସେମାନଙ୍କ ସ୍ଲୋଗାନ ଥିଲା ସ୍ୱତନ୍ତ୍ରତା ଆମର ଦାବି। ତେଣୁ ସେଇ ଯୋଉ ସ୍ୱତନ୍ତ୍ରତା ସେମାନେ ଦାବି କରିଥିଲେ, ଫରାସୀ ବିପ୍ଳବ ତାହା ହିଁ ପାଇଥିଲେ। However, in the 20th century, this liberal nationalism was replaced by what is known as the integral nationalism. This form of nationalism approach is the writings of Murray Barre, Charlemagne's Arthur de Gounod, H.S. Chamberlain, etc. In this version of Mussolini, integral nationalism found political embodiment, which was inserted and extended on a most ruthless fashion by the Hitler and Nazi Germany. It was Moses who first used this term and defined the integral nationalism, the exclusive purity of national politics, the absolute maintenance of national integrity and the steady increase in the national power. Germany एकत्रीकरण, इटाली एकत्रीकरण क्षेत्र में ये जातीयतावाद चिंताधारा हिटलर और मुस्लिम जोड़ा कि नाजीवाद और फासीवाद रूप में धारण करितला, जहाँ यही उग्र रूप धारण करी निज जाति पाई निज मातृभूमि पाई से माने यूनिटी एकता ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରିବା ପାଇଁ ସେମାନଙ୍କ ଭିତରେ ଦେଶ ଭିତରେ ଲୋକମାନଙ୍କୁ ଏକତ୍ରିତ କରିବା ପାଇଁ ନାଜିବାଦ ଆଉ ଫାସିବାଦ ଯାହାଙ୍କ ଥିମ୍ ଏକ ପ୍ରକାର ବିଡା କାଠି ଓ କୁରାଢି ସିମ୍ବଲ ଯେଉଁ ଦେଇଥିଲେ ତାହା ଏକତାକୁ ଗୁରୁତ୍ୱ ଦେଇଥିଲେ। Last point is the anti-colonial approach. Anti-colonial approach, उपनिवेश विरोधी जातीयतावाद. In the 20th century, the period between the two world wars, the Russian Revolution and the rise of fascism were important landmark in the spread of nationalist idea from the Europe to non-European lands of Asia, Africa, Latin America, etc. Collectively, they set in the motion of a process of a national liberalism movements, as the result of which many countries got the independence from the new form of nationalism. New nations like China, India, Pakistan, Egypt, Vietnam grew on the world scenes, which gave a new meaning of the concept of nationalism. A few form of the nationalism and a new meaning of the concept was born in the countries like India, China, and Arab lands. Though he new concept of nationalism, which became the basis of a new states, derived much the ideology of political theory of this West. ବିଂଶ ଶତାବ୍ଦୀରେ ଉପନିବେଶବାଦର ପତନ ହୋଇଥିଲା। ଇଷ୍ଟ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆ କମ୍ପାନୀ ବା ୟୁରୋପିଆନ ଟ୍ରେଡର୍ସ ମାନେ ଏସିଆ, ଅଷ୍ଟ୍ରେଲିଆ, ଆଫ୍ରିକା କଣ୍ଟିନେଣ୍ଟ ଉପରେ ତାଙ୍କର ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଚିନ୍ତା ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରିଥିଲେ। ବିକାଶୋନ୍ମୁଖୀ ବିଶ୍ୱରେ ଅନେକ ପ୍ରକାର ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ଦେଖା ଦେଇଥିଲେ। ତନ୍ମଧ୍ୟରୁ ଉପନିବେଶବାଦ ବିରୁଦ୍ଧରେ ସଂଗ୍ରାମ ଜାରି ରଖି ଏକ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ପ୍ରତିଷ୍ଠା କରାଯାଇଥିଲା। ଏହା ପ୍ରଥମେ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ବା ଜାତି ଗଠନ ସହାୟକ ହୋଇଥାଏ। ଦେଖ ଭାରତରେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ଆନ୍ଦୋଳନ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇଥିଲା, ସର୍ବପ୍ରଥମେ ଗାନ୍ଧୀଜୀ ସାରା ଭାରତ ବର୍ଷରେ ବୁଲି ବୁଲି ଲୋକମାନଙ୍କ ମଧ୍ୟରେ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ଚେତନା ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରିଥିଲେ। ତାପରେ ଉପନିବେଶ ବିରୁଦ୍ଧରେ ବା ଇଷ୍ଟ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆ କମ୍ପାନୀ ବା ଇଂରେଜ ମାନଙ୍କ ବିରୁଦ୍ଧରେ ବିଦ୍ରୋହ ଆରମ୍ଭ କରିଥିଲେ। ଯେ ପର୍ଯ୍ୟନ୍ତ କୌଣସି ଦେଶରେ ଏକ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ନ ହେଇଛି, ଲୋକମାନଙ୍କର ଜାତୀୟତା ପ୍ରେମ, ଦେଶ ପ୍ରେମ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ନ ହେଇଛି, ସେମାନେ କେବେ ଏକତ୍ରିତ ହେଇପାରିବେ ନାହିଁ, ଯାହା ଆମେ ଉପନିବେଶ ବିରୋଧୀ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ଶୁଣିବାକୁ ପାଇଛୁ। ସେଭଳି ଆଫ୍ରିକାରେ ସାଉଥ ଆଫ୍ରିକା ନେଲସନ ମଣ୍ଡେଲା ଦୀର୍ଘ ଦିନ ସଂଗ୍ରାମ କରି ଏହି ଉପନିବେଶ ବିରୋଧ କରି ନିଜ ଦେଶକୁ ସ୍ୱାଧୀନ କରିଛନ୍ତି। ସେଭଳି ଆଫ୍ରିକାନ କଣ୍ଟ୍ରିର ସମସ୍ତ ଦେଶ, ଏସିଆନ କଣ୍ଟ୍ରି, ଲାଟିନ ଆମେରିକା ଉପନିବେଶ ବିରୁଦ୍ଧରେ ଆନ୍ଦୋଳନ କରି ନିଜର ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ହାସଲ କରିଛନ୍ତି। ନେକ୍ସଟ, ନେସନ ୱିଦାଉଟ୍ ଷ୍ଟେଟ୍ ଆଣ୍ଡ ଷ୍ଟେଟ୍ ୱିଦାଉଟ୍ ନେସନ। ନେସନ ୱିଦାଉଟ୍ ଷ୍ଟେଟ୍, ଷ୍ଟେଟ୍ ୱିଦାଉଟ୍ ନେସନ। ଜାତି ବିନା ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରର ଭୂମିକା ନାହିଁ, ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ବିନା ଜାତିର ସୃଷ୍ଟି ନାହିଁ। As a political principle, nationalism holds at the nation and the state hold the congregation. When the nation and the state are coextensive, the level of really used. It is assumed that all the parties and groups are nationalist because the nation they represent is already transformed into a state. Here, nationalism serves as a unifying factor. However, there are many nations in the world which is without a state, and there have been states without a nation. For a proper understanding of nationalism, it is also important to understand how the nationalist discourse is articulated in this state. Nationalism is a nation without state, present substantially different political scenario depending upon the specific characters of the nation state within which such nations are included. A nation state may acknowledge the cultural difference of the minorities without the following more than the cultivation and promotion of their own cultural and maintenance of the some deep-rooted elements of socio-cultural traditions. For example, Scotland, Wales, although although equal partners with England, with the Britain are pushed to go down the London to solve their democratic process. ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ବିନା ଜାତି, ଜାତି ବିନା ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ବା ଜାତି ଆଉ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ଦୁଇଟାକ ପରସ୍ପର ପରିପୂରକ। ସପୋଜ ମୁଁ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆ କଥା କହିବି, ଇଣ୍ଡିଆର ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ଗଠନ ବା ନେସନ ଅଫ ଷ୍ଟେଟ୍ ଅଫ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆ, ନେସନ ଷ୍ଟେଟ୍ ଅଫ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆ, ଇଣ୍ଡିଆର ପରମ୍ପରା, ସଂସ୍କୃତି ଏବଂ ଐତିହାସିକ ହେରିଟେଜ ଏସବୁ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆର ଜାତି ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ଗଠନ କରିବା ପାଇଁ ବାଧ୍ୟ କରିଥିଲା। ଯେତେବେଳେ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆର ରୂପ ଧାରଣ ଖୋଜିବାକୁ ବାହାରିଥିଲା, ସେତେବେଳେ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆର ପ୍ରକୃତ ସଂସ୍କୃତି ବା ସୋସିଓ କଲଚର ଟ୍ରାଡିସନ୍ସ, ଧର୍ମ, ବିଶେଷ କରି ସନାତନ ଧର୍ମ ବା ହିନ୍ଦୁ ଧର୍ମକୁ ଏକତ୍ରିତ କରାଯାଇ ଭାରତର ଗଠନ ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରାଯାଇଥିଲା। A nation can be included within the federation with permits high degree of self-determination for nations without a state. For example, Quebec in the Canadian political system has benefited from the wide political power to decide about the social, economic, and political life without the actually becoming independent. There are certain nations which completely lack of recognition from the state which contains them. In such cases, the state employs itself with the formulating policies aiming and eliminate the differences within the territory. बहुत गुड़े राष्ट्र अच्छी जहाँ जो राष्ट्र गुड़िकरे एपर्यंत भी एकता सृष्टि हो पारे नहीं, कहीं भौगोलिक परिमाप, ऐतिहास, कीर्ति, संस्कृति, परंपरा जहाँकि देखा बहुत कम थाए, जोटा लोक मान मध्य भावना सृष्टि कर बाधा सृष्टि करता है, जातीयता भावना सृष्टि हो पारि न थाए, देश एकता सृष्टि बहुत बाधा सृष्टि होता है। ग्लोबलाइजेशन एंड द फ्यूचर ऑफ द नेशनलिज्म, जागतिक जुगरे राष्ट्र जातीयतावादर आवश्यकता कौन अछि? An important question of that remain to be the answered. It what in the relation between the nationalism and the present wave of globalization. First, whether globalization is a threat of nationalism or whether the globalization is producing a new traditional identity of the third, where the states backlash in that form of strengthening of a common traditional culture. 21st century रे ग्लोबलाइजेशन रो आविर्भाव सृष्टि होबा द्वारा नेशन, नेशनलिज्म, नेशनलिटी व नेशनल बाउंड्री आस्ते आस्ते सीमित होबार लागि। गोटे ग्लोबलाइजेशन मीन्स विश्व स्तर रे, जागतिक स्तर रे आम प्रत्येक देश सहित उत्तम संपर्क सृष्टि करि परिबा बा ग्लोबलाइजेशन अर्थ आम गोटे अर्थ रे बुझी परिबा वर्ल्ड विलेज मीन्स ग्लोबलाइजेशन, वसुधैव कुटुंब मीन्स ग्लोबलाइजेशन। तो ये क्षेत्र राष्ट्र कौन से आवश्यकता नहीं बा नेशनलिज्म कौन से आवश्यकता नहीं, कल्चर किसी आवश्यकता नहीं, मल्टी कल्चरलिज्म बहुत संस्कृति बात सृष्टि होगा देखा मिली। हिंदू धर्म सारा विश्व रे प्रचारित होउची, ख्रिस्टियन माने मध्य हिंदू धर्म ग्रहण करूचंती बा हिंदू धर्म को सन भल पाउचंती, सेही भली ख्रिस्टियन धर्म को मध्य हिंदू माने ग्रहण करूचंती बा ख्रिस्टियन फेस्टिवल गुडी को हिंदू माने मध्य ऑब्जर्व करूचंती। से भली हिंदू और इस्लाम धर्म मध्य मिलन होते लागि। इस्लाम माने दीपावली पालन करता बेले हिंदू माने ईद मुबारक पालन करूचंती। तनो प्रत्येक धर्म भितर संस्कृति समन्वय हबार सृष्टि करिछि ग्लोबलाइजेशन। तो ग्लोबलाइजेशन जुगरे नेशनलिज्म आस्ते आस्ते संकीर्ण हबाकू लागिछि। फाइनली nationalism is a sentiment that has to do with attachment to a homeland, a common language, ideals, values, and traditions, identification of a group with the symbols such as flags, songs, etc., national flag, national song, etc., which make it different from others. The attachment creates an identity, and the appeal to that identity has a past and the power to mobility of the people. Nationalism is a phenomenon which emerged after the African and American and French revolutions. The early liberal writers emphasized upon the humanitarian aspect of nationalism and laid stress upon the socio-cultural aspect of nationalism, such as common language, literature, religion, tradition, habits, symbols, etc. Now, nationalism chapter finish, unit 11 finish. Now, I am going to explain unit 12 forms of nationalism. Forms of nationalism. In this topic, we cover the some points like nation and nationalism, nationalism historical forms like European nationalism, non-European nationalism, nationalism as a difference, and the criticisms. So, in this unity, we will discuss that points. First of all, nation and nationalism already discussed in unity 11. Just introduce about the nation and nationalism. You have already seen the last unity that nationalism generally understood refers to the self-determination and self-consciousness of the people's united entity. It, it concerns itself with the manner in which people see themselves or identify as one and the precise purposes towards which this oneness is directed. An expression of solidarity or interconnections among people, as well as recognition by others of this solidarity, is integral to nationalism. There are different ways in which this solidarity is convenient and articulated. While scholars of nationalism have differed to in their definition of what binds people together as a social solidarity, that is, their ethnic roots of their desire for self-determination by and large, they agree with it that nationalism involves some level of integration among members of a nation, an idea of the whole nation or the collective identity, a degree of understanding of the nature of membership in the whole and the relationship with the other similar wholes. In other words, nationalism involves the self-definition by the people that they constitute a nation. The consciousness that there is something about them as a nation, they make them different from other nations. And that there is a larger imperative from the which the self-definition as a nation drives. While social solidarity, collective identity, and sense of an individual self and relationship with the whose are the essential conditions for the people of a self itself, nation, and the as recognized as such the manner in which social solidarity is brought about the collective identity articulated. Nationalism have differed in their content and form, depending on the historically contingent situations and the context. According to Anthony D. Smith, Anthony D. Smith, nationalism as an ideological movement for the attainment and maintenance of a self-government and independence on behalf of a group, some of whose members conceive it is the conceived and actual or potential nation like others. The logical the logical colours of such attempts and attempt to maintain national independence that are first one securing the fraternity and equality among two nationals or citizens by the integrating them into a homogeneous unity. Number two, unification is a single nation state of extraterritorial co-nation. Third, stressing cultural individuality through the accountation of a national differentiate. Four, the drive of economic accuracy as self-sustaining growth. Five, attempt to the expand of a nation state is maintained international power and status. Six, renewing the cultural and social fabric of the national through sweeping institutional changes to maintain international party. These points are these points are the attempt to the national independence. In ancient and modern concept nationalism, I am already discussion about the ancient theory of nationalism. Now I am going to modern theme of the nationalism. This modern meaning of a nation connoting a sovereign people of a community of equals made nationalhood of a described status. Moreover, the concept of moreover the concept also assumed an unprecedented universality. The concept of a nation became the overreaching identity embracing every member of the English people, each of whom had a national identity. It must be noted that which the new meaning and wider scope of a nation. A dramatic change occurred in the meaning of a people itself. Before it came to be associated with the nation, the term people was generally used to the mass of the rebel of the lower class, and the nation referred to the elite. Now I discuss about the characteristics of a nation. Already previous chapter discussed about the characteristics of the nations. First one is the boundaries of a territory or both. Second, indivisibility, the nation is the integral unity. Third, sovereignty, or at least the aspiration of the sovereignty and thus formal equality with the other nations, usually as the autonomous and private self-sufficient state. Number four, an ascending notion of legitimacy. That is the idea of a government is just only when the supported by popular will or the last when it serves the interest of the people or the nation. Five, popular participation in the collective affairs. A population mobilized on the basis of a national membership. Six, direct membership is in the each individual is understood to the immediately part of the nation and that respect categorically equivalent to other members. Seven, culture including some combination of language, share beliefs and values, habitual practices. There that are the characteristics of nationalism. Now I'm going to a point non-European nationalism. I have already discussed about the European nationalism. Some countries have raised nationalism that are called the non-European nationalism. So far, we have seen that nationalism requires social solidarity, collective identity, and a sense of the autonomous self and its relationship with the sovereign collectivity. All these aspects were evident in the three European experiences in nationalism we have discussed above. In what has come to be seen as one of the most popular conceptions of the nation to have emerged in the past years. Benedict Anderson characterized the nation as an imagined political community and imagined as both inherently limited and sovereign. By imagined, Anderson means the fact that the member of even the smallest nation will never know most of their fellow members, meet them into every here to them. In the minds of each lives, the image of their communion. An important argument by the Anderson, with the which we are practically concerned in the section, in this assertion that are emerged, nationalism assumed a modular form. Nationalism assumed a modular form from where it was available for the future mobilization. Anderson identifies three models. The more available for the emulsions are first one is the cruel nationalism of the Americas, where imagined communities were created by the pilgrimage, probable functionaries, provisionals, Carupanctism. Nationalism as a difference. Nationalism as a difference. According to Anderson's demarcations or demonstrations, the origin and the spread of nationalism was innovative for showing that nations were not entirely determined by the structural conditions or sociological factors like race, religion, or language. They were also not a Glenor would have as believe mere fabrications. Nations were imagined into existence, and this imagination was assisted by the several factors. The predominant one being that a print capitalism. Several scholars have, however, found Anderson's metaphor or modularity or modular forms of nationalism misleading and the problems nationalism, civics, and ethnic. The above discussion makes it clear that despite having some core characteristics, there is in the fact no uniform nationalism, or are there are a set of determined of conditions or the structures which would produce one kind of nationalism and distinct from the other. Historically, we have seen nationalistic have emerged in different forms and have unfolded in different ways. There is, however, a tendency among social scientists to categorize nationalism into two broad and dichotomous categories. The two categories are conceptualized in different sources in oppositional terms as political versus cultural, Western versus Eastern, and more recently civic versus ethnic. Nationalism reflecting of the general divide among the scholars on the question of origin nature of the nationalism. ଆମେ ନ୍ୟାସନାଲିଜିମ୍ ବା ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ଚାପ୍ଟର ଦେଖିଲୁ ଦୁଇଟି ଗ୍ରୁପ ଗୋଟେ ହେଲା ପାଶ୍ଚାତ୍ୟ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ, ପ୍ରାଚ୍ୟ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ। ପାଶ୍ଚାତ୍ୟ କହିଲେ ଡେଭଲପ୍ଡ କଣ୍ଟ୍ରିରେ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇଥିବା ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ, by European American country ସୃଷ୍ଟି ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ। ଇଷ୍ଟର୍ନ ନ୍ୟାସନାଲିଜିମ୍ କହିଲେ ବା ପ୍ରାଚ୍ୟ ସଭ୍ୟତା, ଏସିଆନ୍ some part of the European countries that developed their nationalism। ତେଣୁ ପାଶ୍ଚାତ୍ୟ ଓ ପ୍ରାଚ୍ୟ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦରେ ଫରକ ଦେଖିଲେ। and political and cultural, ରାଜନୈତିକ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ, ସାଂସ୍କୃତିକ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ। ଭାରତ ଭଳି ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରରେ ସାଂସ୍କୃତିକ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇଥିବା ବେଳେ ଜର୍ମାନୀ ଇଟାଲୀରେ ରାଜନୈତିକ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇଥାଏ। ସିଭିକ୍ ଆଣ୍ଡ ଏଥନିକ୍, ସିଭିକ୍ ହେଲା ସିଭିଲ સોસાયટી, ଏଥନିକ୍ ହେଲା दा origin tribes। ତେଣୁ ଗୋଟିଏ ସଭ୍ୟ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ସଭ୍ୟ ବିକଶିତ ହୋଇନଥିବା ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର, ପ୍ରତ୍ୟେକ କ୍ଷେତ୍ରରେ ଯଦି ଆମେ ତୁଳନା କରିବା ସଭ୍ୟ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ଓ ସଭ୍ୟ ବିକଶିତ ହୋଇନଥିବା ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ମଧ୍ୟ ବହୁତ ଫରକ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇଥାଏ। ବିଶେଷ କରି ୟୁରୋପିଆନ କଣ୍ଟ୍ରି ଗୁଡ଼ିକ ହେଉଛନ୍ତି ସିଭିକ୍ ନ୍ୟାସନାଲିଜିମ୍ ବା ସଭ୍ୟ ବିକଶିତ ହୋଇଥିବା ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର। ଆଫ୍ରିକାନ କଣ୍ଟ୍ରି ଗୁଡ଼ିକ ହେଉଛନ୍ତି ସଭ୍ୟ ବିକଶିତ ହୋଇନଥିବା ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର। ଯେଉଁ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରରେ ସଭ୍ୟତା ବିକଶିତ ହୋଇନାହିଁ ସେଠି ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହେବା ବହୁତ କଷ୍ଟ। ଯେମିତି ଦିନ ଥିଲା ଭାରତରେ ମଧ୍ୟ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇପାରୁନଥିଲା ବା ଆମ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ନଥିବାରୁ ବା ଏକତା ନଥିବାରୁ ବିଦେଶୀ ଶକ୍ତିମାନେ ଭାରତକୁ ବାରମ୍ବାର ଆକ୍ରମଣ କରୁଥିଲେ। ଏପରିକି ଇଷ୍ଟ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆ କମ୍ପାନୀ ମଧ୍ୟ ଭାରତକୁ ଆକ୍ରମଣ କରି ଭାରତକୁ ଅଧିକାର କରିନେଇଥିଲା। ତାର ମୂଳ କାରଣ ଥିଲା ଯେ ଏଥନିକ୍ ଥିଙ୍କିଂ ଅଫ୍ ଏଥନିକ୍। ଯେତେବେଳେ ଆମେ ସିଭିକ୍ ହେଲୁ ସେତେବେଳେ ଆମ ସଭ୍ୟତା ଜାଣିଲୁ, ଆମ ଦେଶ ବିଷୟରେ, ମାତୃଭୂମି ବିଷୟରେ ଜାଣିଲୁ, ଆମ ମାତୃଭୂମିକୁ ଇଂଲଣ୍ଡ ଠାରୁ ଆମେ ଅଧିକାରକୁ ଗ୍ରହଣ କରିଲୁ। So the summary of the forms of nationalism, the above discussion has shown that there is no general, uniform or modular nationalism that can be applied universally. Historically, different types of nationalism have occurred with different conceptions of national collectives and constructions of nationhood. The common denominator of all these different movements, ideas, policies, and projects is the nationalist discourse. In other words, what unites nationalism is the discourse and rhetoric of nationhood, which has its core ideas of self-consciousness and self-determination. Self-consciousness and self-determinations are woven around the nation of people as a unified entity. The idea of the nation has emerged historically as a category denoting an identity, oneness, and this sense of oneness, identity, and unity to a large extent was contingent of a nation of equality, which formed the modern meaning of the nations। ଜାତି, ଜାତୀୟତା, ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ, ନେସନ, ନ୍ୟାସନାଲିଟି, ନ୍ୟାସନାଲିଜିମ୍ ସେତେବେଳେ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୁଏ ଯେତେବେଳେ ମଣିଷ ଭିତରେ ନିଜ ଦେଶ ପ୍ରତି, ମାତୃଭୂମି ପ୍ରତି, ନିଜ ମାଟିର ମମତା ପ୍ରତି ଭଲ ପାଇବା ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୁଏ, ଜାଗ୍ରତ ହୁଏ, ସେତେବେଳେ ତାହା ହିଁ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇଥାଏ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ। ତେଣୁ ଜାତି ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ଗଠନ ହେବା ପରେ এই ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ପ୍ରତ୍ୟେକ ମଣିଷ ମନକୁ ଛୁଇଁଥିଲା ଏବଂ ଶେଷରେ ନିଜ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରକୁ ବଞ୍ଚାଇବା ପାଇଁ, ନିଜ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ଏକତାକୁ ରକ୍ଷା କରିବା ପାଇଁ ନାଗରିକମାନେ ସର୍ବଦା ଚେଷ୍ଟା କରି ଆସିଛନ୍ତି। ଯେମିତିକି ଭାରତର ଜାତୀୟତା ରକ୍ଷା କରିବା ପାଇଁ, ନିଜ ମାତୃ ରକ୍ଷା କରିବା ପାଇଁ ବହୁ ସଂଗ୍ରାମୀମାନେ ନିଜ ରକ୍ତକୁ ଦାନ କରିଛନ୍ତି। ଠିକ୍ ସେହିଭଳି ଆଜି ବି ନିଜ ଦେଶକୁ ରକ୍ଷା କରିବା ପାଇଁ ପ୍ରତ୍ୟେକ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରର ଆଇଡିଆଲ ସିଟିଜେନ ବା ଆଦର୍ଶ ନାଗରିକ ମାନଙ୍କର ପ୍ରଥମ କର୍ତ୍ତବ୍ୟ ରହୁଛି। ଦେଶ ରହିଲେ ଜାତି ରହିବ, ଜାତି ରହିଲେ ନାଗରିକ ରହିବ। ତେଣୁ ନାଗରିକ ବା ଦେଶ ଆଉ ଲୋକ, ଲୋକ ଆଉ ଦେଶ ଦୁଇଟା ପରସ୍ପର ଜଡ଼ିତ। ଦେଶ ଥିଲେ ଲୋକର ଆବଶ୍ୟକ, ଲୋକ ରହିଲେ ଦେଶର ଆବଶ୍ୟକ ରହିଛି। ତେଣୁ ନିଜ ଦେଶକୁ ଆମେ ଯେମିତି ଭଲ ପାଇବା ଅନ୍ୟ ଦେଶକୁ କେବେ ସେମିତି ଭଲ ପାଇପାରିବା ନାହିଁ। ନିଜ ଦେଶର ପାଣି, ପବନ, ମାଟି ଆମକୁ ଯେତେ ମିଠା ଲାଗିବ ଅନ୍ୟ ଦେଶରେ ତାହା କେବେ ଲାଗିପାରିବ ନାହିଁ। ତ ସେଥିପାଇଁ ଆମ ଦେଶ ବା ନିଜ ମାତୃଭୂମିକୁ ସୁରକ୍ଷା ଦେବା ଆମର ପ୍ରଥମ କର୍ତ୍ତବ୍ୟ, ଯୋଉଟା କି ନେସନ, ନ୍ୟାସନାଲିଟି ଆଣ୍ଡ ନ୍ୟାସନାଲିଜିମ୍ ଚାପ୍ଟରରେ ଆମେ ଶିକ୍ଷା କରିଲୁ। Next, I'm going to next chapter, next unity 13, colonialism and anti-colonialism. Colonialism and anti-colonialism. ଉପନିବେଶବାଦ ଉପନିବେଶ ବିରୋଧୀବାଦ ବିଷୟରେ ଆମେ ଅଲରେଡି ତ ପଢି ସାରିଛୁ ଆଗରୁ। ଆଉ ୟୁନିଟ୍ 13 ରେ ଯାହା ଅଛି ଆମେ ଆଉଥରେ ଆମେ ଆଲୋଚନା କରିବା। ଉପନିବେଶବାଦ କେବେ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହେଲା? 1600 ଖ୍ରୀଷ୍ଟାବ୍ଦରେ 1600 ଖ୍ରୀଷ୍ଟାବ୍ଦରେ ୟୁରୋପିଆନ ମାନେ ନିଜର ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ବଜାର ଖୋଜିବା ଉଦ୍ଦେଶ୍ୟରେ ସେମାନେ ବିଭିନ୍ନ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରକୁ ବା ବିଭିନ୍ନ ଦେଶକୁ ଗତି କରିଥିଲେ। ଏସିଆ, ଆଫ୍ରିକା, ଅଷ୍ଟ୍ରେଲିଆ ଏଭଳି ସବୁ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରକୁ ମହାଦେଶକୁ ଯାଇ ନିଜର ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ବଜାର ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରିବା ପାଇଁ ଚେଷ୍ଟା କରିଥିଲେ। ଯଦି ଆମେ ଭାରତ କଥା କହିବା, ୟୁରୋପିଆନ ମାନେ ବିଶେଷ କରି ଭାରତକୁ ଆସିଥିଲେ ବେପାର ବାଣିଜ୍ୟ ଉଦ୍ଦେଶ୍ୟରେ ବା ନିଜର ବଜାର ଖୋଜିବା ଉଦ୍ଦେଶ୍ୟରେ। ତେଣୁ ଭାରତକୁ ଆସି ସେମାନେ ନିଜର ଉପନିବେଶବାଦ ପ୍ରତିଷ୍ଠା କରିଥିଲେ ଏବଂ ଧୀରେ ଧୀରେ ଭାରତର ବେପାର ବାଣିଜ୍ୟ କରିବା ସହିତ ଭାରତରେ ଥିବା ଭାରତୀୟ କମ୍ପାନୀ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ପ୍ରତିଯୋଗିତା କରି ଏ କମ୍ପାନୀକୁ ବନ୍ଦ କରିବା ସହିତ ଧୀରେ ଧୀରେ ଭାରତର ରାଜନୈତିକ କ୍ଷମତା ଉପରେ ତାଙ୍କର ଲୋଲୁପ ଦୃଷ୍ଟି ପଡିଥିଲା। ଶେଷରେ ଭାରତର ରାଜନୈତିକ କ୍ଷମତାକୁ ନିଜର ହସ୍ତଗତ କରିଥିଲେ। ଏଇଭଳି ମନୋଭାବ ରଖିଥିବା ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ହେଉଛି ଉପନିବେଶବାଦ। ଉପନିବେଶବାଦର ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ହେଉଛି ପ୍ରଥମେ ବେପାର ବାଣିଜ୍ୟ କରିବାକୁ ଆସିବେ, ଏହାପରେ ତାଙ୍କର ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟ ବିସ୍ତାର କରିବା ନୀତି ଆପଣେଇବେ। ଏହା ହିଁ ଉପନିବେଶବାଦର ମୂଳ ମନ୍ତ୍ର। The origin and growth of modern colonialism. The origin and growth of modern colonialism. The economic of colonialism. Both colonization and empire building are ancient practices. Ancient Greeks and Rome and both colonies have empires. Through empires means that a bigger territory and colonies. Such colonization was backed by the home country, that in turn derived revenues from the colonies in the was backed by the home country. 15th and 16th century began a vigorous colonization drive of the European powers in search of land and national resources like gold. The continents of America and Africa fell victim to it. Later, Asia and Australia came under the spell of the drive. In this last half of the 17th century, we are told by the British historian G.M. Trevelyan, England's statesmen and merchants put a high value on the American colony. G.M. Trevelyan writes in his book, the overseas possessions were valued as fulfilling a twofold purpose. First, as supplying as the appropriate outlet for the energetic, the distant, the oppressed, the debtors, the criminals, and the failure of old England. A sphere where the energies of men who were too good or too bad not to be troublesome at home might be turned to lose the general advantage, as yet no pressing questions of a purely economic excess of the population in England. Secondly, the colonies were valued as the market where the materials could be bought and manufactured, which is sold by the advantage of England industry and the commerce. England ମାନେ ଭାରତକୁ ଆସିଥିଲେ, ଭାରତରେ ର ମେଟେରିଆଲ ପ୍ରଡକ୍ସନ କଲେ ଆଉ କଲେକ୍ସନ କଲେ, ତାକୁ ନେଇ ମ୍ୟାନୁଫ୍ୟାକ୍ଚର କରି ଶେଷରେ ପ୍ରଡକ୍ସନ ହୋଇଥିବା ପ୍ରସେସ ଗୁଡାକୁ ବିଶ୍ୱ ବଜାରରେ ବିକ୍ରି କରିବାକୁ ଲାଗିଲେ। ତ ସେଇ ସେମାନେ ବିଶ୍ୱ ବଜାର ଖୋଜିବାକୁ ଆରମ୍ଭ କଲେ। In the late 18th century, however, the 13th British colonies in North America ceded from the empire and through soon that called themselves states. They remained colonies all the same, being inhabited and forced into the reservations. Their origin, inhabitants of the Portuguese and Spanish colonies of Latin America, the process was more or less the same of these was mixed. ଭାରତ ଭଳି ୟୁରୋପିଆନ ମାନେ ମଧ୍ୟ ଆମେରିକାକୁ ପ୍ରବେଶ କରିଥିଲେ। ଆମେରିକାରେ ବ୍ରିଟିଶ ମାନେ, ଡଚ୍ ମାନେ, ଫ୍ରେଞ୍ଚ ମାନେ ପ୍ରବେଶ କରି ସେଠାରେ କଲୋନି ପ୍ରତିଷ୍ଠା କରିଥିଲେ। ତେଣୁ ଦୀର୍ଘ ଦିନ ଧରି ୟୁରୋପିଆନ ମାନେ ଆମେରିକାର ବିଶ୍ୱ ବଜାର ବା ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରିବା ଦ୍ୱାରା ଉପନିବେଶ ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରିବା ଦ୍ୱାରା ଆମେରିକାର ରାଜନୈତିକ କ୍ଷମତାକୁ ନିଜ ହାତକୁ ନେଇଥିଲେ। ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ଆମେରିକା 1776 ମସିହାରେ ନିଜ ଦେଶର ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତାକୁ ପ୍ରାପ୍ତ କରିଥିଲା ବା କମ୍ପାନୀକୁ ସେଠୁ ଆମେରିକାରୁ ହଟାଇ ଦେବାକୁ ପଡ଼ିଥିଲା। ଆଣ୍ଟି କଲୋନିଜିମ୍ ଉପନିବେଶ ବିରୁଦ୍ଧରେ ବିଶେଷ କରି ସର୍ବପ୍ରଥମେ ଆମେରିକା ଚରଣ ଉତ୍ତୋଳନ କରିଥିଲା। 1776 ମସିହାରେ ନିଜର ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ଦାବି କରିଥିଲା ଏବଂ ସକ୍ସେସଫୁଲ ହେବା ପରେ ଭାରତ ସମେତ ଆଫ୍ରିକାନ କଣ୍ଟ୍ରି, ଭାରତରେ ମହାତ୍ମା ଗାନ୍ଧୀ, ସାଉଥ ଆଫ୍ରିକାର ନେଲସନ ମଣ୍ଡେଲା ବା ଅନ୍ୟାନ୍ୟ ଦେଶ ମହାଦେଶରେ ସବୁ ଜାତୀୟତାବାଦୀ ନେତାମାନେ ଏହି କଲୋନିଜିମ୍ ବିରୁଦ୍ଧରେ ସ୍ୱର ଉତ୍ତୋଳନ କରିଥିଲେ ଏବଂ ଏହାକୁ ବନ୍ଦ କରିବା ପାଇଁ ମଧ୍ୟ ଚେଷ୍ଟା କରିଥିଲେ। ଶେଷରେ ଉପନିବେଶବାଦ ବନ୍ଦ ହୋଇଥିଲା ଓ ଆଣ୍ଟି ଉପନିବେଶ ବିରୋଧୀ ବିଭିନ୍ନ ସଂଗଠନ ମାନ ମଧ୍ୟ ଗଢ଼ି ଉଠିଥିଲା। ଯେତେବେଳେ ୟୁରୋସେଣ୍ଟ୍ରିଜିମ୍ ୟୁରୋ କୈନ୍ଦ୍ରିକବାଦ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇଥିଲା, ତା ଏଗନେଷ୍ଟରେ ଆଫ୍ରୋସେଣ୍ଟ୍ରିଜିମ୍ ଆଫ୍ରିକା କୈନ୍ଦ୍ରିକବାଦ ମଧ୍ୟ ଅନୁରୂପ ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରାଯାଇଥିଲା। ତାର ଉଦ୍ଦେଶ୍ୟ ଥିଲା କି ଉପନିବେଶବାଦକୁ ହଟାଅ। ନେକ୍ସଟ ଇମ୍ପେରିଆଲିଜିମ୍ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଉପନିବେଶବାଦରୁ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରିଥାଏ। Colonial imperialism always had two kinds of justification. One was that it was the white man burden, a civilizing mission to the benefit of the backward countries. Another was that it was unintended, merely pushed by the circumstances that hindered free trade of the West. In 1961, Robinson and Gallagher brought to the thesis that Britain generally did business with the non-European world through the collaborations. It was only when the such collaborators were not found or turned into the diversity of the world when annexed their territories. Further, Britain's Americans annexes were the primarily to safeguard trade routes to India. In 1919, however, the liberal German economist J.A. Sumner offered a sociological theory of imperialism, denying and necessary connections between the capitalism and imperialism. He saw the imperialism as the activities feudalism mentalistic of certain pre-capitalist social structures. 1919 ମସିହାରେ ଉଦାରବାଦୀ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ନାୟକ ଜର୍ମାନ ଇକୋନୋମିଷ୍ଟ ଜେସ୍ କମ୍ପାର୍ଟର ସେ ତାଙ୍କ ପୁସ୍ତକରେ ଲେଖିଥିଲେ କି ଏହି ଇମ୍ପେରିଆଲିଜମ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ବିରୁଦ୍ଧରେ ଯେ ପୁଞ୍ଜିପତିବାଦ ବା ପୁଞ୍ଜିବାଦ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହେବା ଦ୍ୱାରା ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇଥାଏ। ପୁଞ୍ଜିବାଦରୁ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇଥିଲା। ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦରୁ ସାମନ୍ତବାଦ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ମଧ୍ୟ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇଥିଲା। ପୁଞ୍ଜିବାଦ, ସାମନ୍ତବାଦ ଓ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଏକା ଧାରରେ ଏକା ସରଳ ରେଖାରେ ଏହା ଗତି କରିଥାଏ। ତେଣୁ ଭାରତରେ ମଧ୍ୟ ସେହିଭଳି ସାମନ୍ତବାଦ, ପୁଞ୍ଜିବାଦ ଆଉ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦର ହିଁ ଦେଖିବାକୁ ମିଳିଥିଲା। Social impact of colonialism ଏହି ଉପନିବେଶବାଦ ଉପରେ ସମାଜ କଣ ପ୍ରଭାବ ପଡ଼ିଥିଲା? Important point of that collaborate changes from to time. An old group becoming the frustrated grew critical and even hostile to the rulers, while a new group of the improved. This collaboration of opposition and the colonial rule, however, did not flow from the modernism and the conservatism of such, although the conservative associationally protested against some of the modern moves of colonial regimes. ତେଣୁ ଆଧୁନିକ ଯୁଗରେ ଏହି ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରାକୁ ବେଶୀ ଦିନ ଆଗକୁ ଯିବାକୁ ଦିଆଯାଇ ନଥିଲା। The colonial government and their historians saw as revolts as a conservative opposition of their progressive welfare activities. Some anthropologists there call it or the primary resistance of movements. ବିଭିନ୍ନ ଜାଗାରେ ଏହା ଏକ ବିଦ୍ରୋହ ଆନ୍ଦୋଳନ ଓ ସୂତ୍ରପାତ ଘଟିଥିଲା। ତେଣୁ ଦୀର୍ଘ ଦିନ ଧରି ଚାଲିଥିବା ଉପନିବେଶବାଦ ଆଉ ତାର ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଚିନ୍ତା ବା ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ କାର୍ଯ୍ୟକାରୀ ହୋଇନଥିଲା। ଶେଷରେ ଏ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ବନ୍ଦ ହେବାକୁ ଲାଗିଥିଲା। ଆମେ ଆମେରିକା ଚିନ୍ତା କରିବା କଲୋନିଆଲିଜିମ ଇନ୍ ଆମେରିକା। ଆମେରିକା ମଧ୍ୟ ଉପନିବେଶବାଦ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରିଥିଲା। Colonialism began in the American continent with the arrival of Spain and Portugal closed on the vales of Columbus. By the intervention of the Pope, whom with Spain and Portugal paid their obeisance because of the Catholic faith of old was divided into colonialism with the hemisphere west of the Brazil onwards filling the Portugal and the hemisphere is the Brazil falling to the Spain. Spain occupied the Mexico and much of the northern territory now belonging to the USA. The two countries were followed by the British and French colonies. The British colonies eventually emerged for the successful of others. By considerably the developing the French of the Spanish colonies capturing the territory. ଆମେରିକାରେ ବ୍ରିଟିଶ କଲୋନି, ଫ୍ରେଞ୍ଚ କଲୋନି ଓ ସ୍ପେନିଶ କଲୋନି ଦେଖିବାକୁ ମିଳିଥାଏ। ଏ ତିନୋଟି ଜାତି ବା ତିନୋଟି ଦେଶର ଲୋକମାନେ ଆମେରିକାର ଯୋଉ ଉପନିବେଶବାଦ ଆଉ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ନେଇ ଯୋଉ ସୃଷ୍ଟି କରିଥିଲେ ଉପନିବେଶ, ତାହା ଆମେରିକାର ଜାତୀୟତାକୁ ନଷ୍ଟ କରି ତାହା ଭାଗ ଭାଗ କରିଦେଇଥିଲା। ଇଂଲଣ୍ଡିଆନ ଗୋଷ୍ଠୀ, ଫ୍ରାନ୍ସ ଗୋଷ୍ଠୀ ଓ ସ୍ପେନିଶ ଗୋଷ୍ଠୀରେ ତାହା ବିଭକ୍ତ ଦେଖିବାକୁ ମିଳିଥିଲା। ବିଭିନ୍ନ କଲୋନି ମଧ୍ୟ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହେଇଥିଲା। ଫାଇନାଲି ଆମେରିକାରେ 13ଟି କଲୋନି ବା 13ଟି ଷ୍ଟେଟରେ ପରିଣତ ହେବାକୁ ଲାଗିଥିଲା। ସାଉଥ ଇଷ୍ଟ ଏସିଆରେ କଲୋନିଆଲ ଇମ୍ପେରିଆଲିଜିମ ସାଉଥ ଇଷ୍ଟ ଏସିଆରେ ଦକ୍ଷିଣ ଏସିଆରେ ଏହି ଉପନିବେଶ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦର କଣ ପ୍ରଭାବ ପଡିଥିଲା? By the beginning of the 19th century, South Asia, including the India and Sri Lanka, was under British control. Yet in the India, authority of the technical exercised by the England East India Company as the tenants of the Delhi's Mughal rule. In 1857, their ruler was overthrown and the 1858 Victoria, Queen of England, took over the territory and the government of the British India. About a third of the subcontinent, however, was allowed to remain normally independent under the native prince. In 1877, Queen Victoria was proclaimed that Empress of India was the princely state where the both of under paramountcy of the British crown. ବ୍ରିଟିଶ ମାନେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆକୁ ପ୍ରବେଶ କରିଥିଲେ, ଇଷ୍ଟ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆ କମ୍ପାନୀ ପ୍ରତିଷ୍ଠା କରି ଇଣ୍ଡିଆକୁ ଅଧିକାର କରିଥିଲେ, ସେଭଳି ସାଉଥ ଇଷ୍ଟରେ ଭାରତ, ଶ୍ରୀଲଙ୍କା, ଚାଇନା ଦେଶ ଗୁଡିକ ମଧ୍ୟ ସେ ଅଧିକାର କରିନେଇଥିଲେ। ରାଣୀ ଭିକ୍ଟୋରିଆ ଭାରତ ଆସିବା ଦ୍ୱାରା 1858 ମସିହା ଭିକ୍ଟୋରିଆ ଆସିକୁ ଇଷ୍ଟ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆ କମ୍ପାନୀ ଶାସନକୁ ବନ୍ଦ କରି ବ୍ରିଟିଶ ପାର୍ଲାମେଣ୍ଟ ଶାସନ ଭାରତରେ ପ୍ରତିଷ୍ଠା କରିଥିଲା ଏବଂ ଭାରତରେ ବ୍ରିଟିଶ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଦୃଢ ହୋଇଯାଇଥିଲା। ତେଣୁ 1858ରୁ 1947 ପର୍ଯ୍ୟନ୍ତ ବ୍ରିଟିଶ ପାର୍ଲାମେଣ୍ଟ ଭାରତରେ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ନୀତି ଭାରତକୁ ଅଧୀନସ୍ଥ କରି ରଖିଥିଲା। ସେଭଳି ଶ୍ରୀଲଙ୍କା, ଚାଇନା ବହୁତ କଣ୍ଟ୍ରି ଇଂଲଣ୍ଡ ଅଧୀନ ରହିଥିଲା। ସେଭଳି ଫ୍ରାନ୍ସର ଅଧୀନ ବହୁତ ଅଞ୍ଚଳ ରହିଥିଲା। 1866, Burma was annexed to the huge benefit of the empire in terms of the forest, oil, and agriculture. Britain tried to annex Afghanistan and thwarted by the traced Russia. A large part of the territory was, however, annexed to British India in 1902. Burma, Thailand, Afghan ଏସବୁ ଅଞ୍ଚଳ ଯୋଉ ଜଙ୍ଗଲ ଗୁଡ଼ିକ ଥିଲା ଏସବୁ ବ୍ରିଟିଶ ତାକୁ ଅଧିକାର କରିଥିଲା ଜଙ୍ଗଲ କାଟି ନେଇଯାଇଥିଲା। ସେହିଭଳି ଏସିଆର ସାଉଥ ବା ଦକ୍ଷିଣ ଭାଗରେ ବ୍ରିଟିଶର କଲୋନି ବା ବ୍ରିଟିଶର ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଦବଦବା ବହୁ ମାତ୍ରାରେ ବଢି ଚାଲିଥିଲା। Japan and USA. Japan and USA. The story of colonialism in South and East Asia will not be complete without the reference to the rise of the Japan Empire at the beginning of the 20th century. Japan first clashed with the Britain in 1902 and with the Tsarist Russia in 1904. She occupied Korea in 1905 and annexed it in the 1911. It fought World War I on the Allied side with the imperialist ambition over China and the Pacific region. In 1931, it actually invaded the Manchuria of China. During World War II, she joined the Axis power and invaded South Asia, advancing as far as the eastern broadland of British India. This helped the growth of a nationalist movement in Southeast Asia and loses the control of the European powers. Even the region, even the USA occupied the Philippines in 1898 and held it in 1946. ଜାପାନ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଚିନ୍ତାଧାରା ଦ୍ୱାରା ପ୍ରଭାବିତ ହୋଇଥିଲା। ଜାପାନ କୋରିଆକୁ ଆକ୍ରମଣ କରିଥିଲା ଆଉ ଅଧିକାର ମଧ୍ୟ କରିଥିଲା। ସେହିଭଳି ଚାଇନାକୁ ମଧ୍ୟ ଆକ୍ରମଣ କରିଥିଲା, ମାଞ୍ଚୁରିଆ ମଧ୍ୟ ଅଧିକାର କରିଥିଲା। ଜାପାନର ଶକ୍ତି ବୃଦ୍ଧି ପାଇଥିଲା। ଏହା ଦ୍ୱାରା ଜାପାନ ଏସିଆ ମହାଦେଶରେ ପାୱାରଫୁଲ କଣ୍ଟ୍ରି ରୂପେ ପରିଚିତ ହୋଇଥିଲା। ଏହାପରେ ୟୁଏସଏ ସହିତ ଜାପାନର ଯୁଦ୍ଧ ହୋଇଥିଲା ଏବଂ ୟୁଏସଏ ଜାପାନକୁ ସବୁଦିନ ପାଇଁ ସମାପ୍ତ କରିଦେଇଥିଲା। ଏହିଭଳି ଭାବରେ ପୃଥିବୀର ଅନେକ ଜାଗାରେ ଏହି ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦ ଉପନିବେଶବାଦ କିପରି ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟ ପରିଣତ ହୋଇଥିଲା ତାହା ଆମେ ଦେଖିବାକୁ ପାଇଲୁ। ଏ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦକୁ ଦୂର କରିବା ପାଇଁ ବିଭିନ୍ନ ଆନ୍ଦୋଳନ ସବୁ ଦେଖା ଦେଇଥିଲା। ଇଣ୍ଡିଆ ଏଜ୍ ଦ ମଡେଲ, colonial movement ବିରୁଦ୍ଧରେ ଭାରତର ଭୂମିକା ବହୁତ କିଛି ଅଛି। The Indian National Congress that fought united the Indians of the loyal but critical platform due into the fold of the elite of all sections of the Indian society and even some compassionate European subject of the British Raj. Its leadership was essentially upper middle class professional, but it included and was backed by the several landlords by the advisory of the Raj. At the end of the 19th century, emerged the extremist wing of a section of which reason to the revolutionary violence. World War I, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, known as Mahatma Gandhi, turned the Indian National Congress into a mass party and through the non-violent resistance challenged to the might of the British Empire. Notwithstanding the departure of several early groups for the fold of strength of the Indian National Congress increased steadily, so such that British hand over power the organizations. महात्मा गांधी प्रवेश माध्यम भारत INC इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस पावर वृद्धि होता। या पूर्व महात्मा गांधी दक्षिण आफ्रिकार निजर व्यक्तित्व और तांकर वीरत्व प्रकाश करथिले जहा द्वारा कि सारा विश्व तांको जानितला एवं भारत रे किपरि ब्रिटिश राज को नष्ट करा जिवो सेतिबे महात्मा गांधी मतलब तीनोटी बड़ बड़ आंदोलन सृष्टि करथिले गोटे थिला नॉन कोऑपरेशन मूवमेंट 1920 1920 मसारे असहयोग आंदोलन सृष्टि हेतिला जोटा कि ब्रिटिश रो जो थिला राज को अकामी करिबार सक्षम हेतिला परवर्ती अवस्था आउ एक आंदोलन सृष्टि करथिले जोटा को हमें सिविल डिसओबीडियंस मूवमेंट 1930 बा ताको लवण सत्याग्रह नाम परिचित से महात्मा गांधी ब्रिटिश मेरुदंड भांगी देते किंतु ब्रिटिश को मूलोत्पाटन कर सक्सेसफुल हो नथिले शेष थर पर 1942 रे महात्मा गांधी क्वाइट इंडिया मूवमेंट भारत छाड़ आंदोलन आरंभ करथिले यही आंदोलन थिला गांधी शेष आंदोलन एवं ब्रिटिश मान को भारत रु सबुदिन बाहर करने से सक्षम होते तो यही भाव विश्व साम्राज्य विरुद्ध उपनिवेश विरोधी आंदोलन सृष्टि द्वारा उपनिवेश समाप्त घटी साम्राज्यवाद लोप पाई द समरी ऑफ colonial imperialism though preliminary colonialism has a geographical and political connotation whose the system were grounded in the strong economic motives. Modern colonialism started in the 15th century and came to its climax in the late 19th century when imperialism virtually became a creed of the developed capitalist countries of the West. The essential purpose was that to inquire of natural resources of the subject countries and to develop them as a captive mass of the financed products. The resulting conflicts produced to World War. The subject countries first offered primarily resistance to the conquest. Such resistance was conservative and often imbued with the religious emotions, but they did not succeed. The colonial imperial powers that ruled with the assistance of collaborators, but the scope of each collaboration was limited by the desolations elite of the colonial ultimately united to oppor the ruling powers. Anti-colonial struggles became the powerful in Asia after the World War I and in Africa after the World War II. By the 1970s, the process of decolonialism of the world was completed. Finally, in the decade of 1970s, decolonialism, the death of the colonialism in the world. Now, I am going to Unit 14, Nationality and Self-Determination. Already, nationalism discussed in the previous unity. Nationality and self-determination. We are identified by our national. I am an Indian. I am an Indian. I was identified my nation. So, the term nationality, however, the extremely difficult to define. Doubtless, it comes from the word nation as an abstract one of the means of nationhood. The fact of being a nation, for example, of the nationality of the pools of the slaves, or being members of the nation. For example, my Indian nationality, or Tony Blair, Prime Minister of British, Tony Blair's British nationality as a concrete noun. As a concrete noun, it means the small nation or the potential nation. For example, the Scottish nationality in the United Kingdom. Political freedom in turn conceived two says first one, complete the independence with the sovereign status. Number two, self-determination, that is the large autonomy or freedom to the control the internal affairs of the people within the framework of a national state or the empire. It is should be noted, however, that when the second arrangements exist of the top government gives it the arrangement the same self-government, but the concerned people call the self-determination. The difference between the two concepts, self-government and self-determination, lies in the fact that self-government is supposed to be a gift of the central imperial government, while self-determination is supposed to have the earned by the local people through agitation or struggle. In self-government, the central of the imperial government returns the ultimate. If nominal in self-government in the central or the imperial government retains the ultimate if in nominal control over the local government while it is self-determination, the local people retain in the portion of a claim sovereign independent status. The Irish Empire, Irish Samrajya, the Irish Empire of examples, the example of Ireland. The example of Ireland is a case in point. This Catholic majority region was always unhappy with it being part of the United Kingdom dominated by the Protestant dominant England. By the end of the 19th century, migration turned Northern Ireland into a Protestant majority region. In 1922, the United Kingdom granted the Southern Ireland self-government of the same Irish Free State. ଇଂଲଣ୍ଡ ଅଧୀନସ୍ଥ ଥିବା ଏକ ଅଞ୍ଚଳ ହେଉଛି ଆୟରଲାଣ୍ଡ, ଯାହାକୁ ଆମେ ଇରିଶ ଭାବରେ ପରିଚିତ। ତେଣୁ ଦୀର୍ଘ ଦିନ ଧରି ଆୟରଲାଣ୍ଡ ଇଂଲଣ୍ଡ ଅଧୀନସ୍ଥରେ ବା ଇଂଲଣ୍ଡ ଅଧୀନରେ କାର୍ଯ୍ୟ କରୁଥିଲା। ବିଶେଷ କରି ଚର୍ଚ୍ଚର କ୍ୟାଥୋଲିକ ଚର୍ଚ୍ଚର ରୋମର ଫାଦର ଏହାକୁ ବହୁତ ଅସନ୍ତୋଷ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତ କରିଥିଲେ। କାହିଁକି ନା ଖ୍ରୀଷ୍ଟ ଧର୍ମ ଦି ପ୍ରକାର ଥିଲା, ଗୋଟେ କ୍ୟାଥୋଲିକ ଧର୍ମ ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ହେଲା ପ୍ରୋଟେଷ୍ଟାଣ୍ଟ ଧର୍ମ। ତେଣୁ ସେମାନେ ପ୍ରୋଟେଷ୍ଟାଣ୍ଟ ଧର୍ମ ଥିବା ବେଳେ ଚର୍ଚ୍ଚ କ୍ୟାଥୋଲିକ ଧର୍ମ ଥିଲା। ତେଣୁ କ୍ୟାଥୋଲିକ ଧର୍ମର ପୋପ୍ ଏହାକୁ ବିରୋଧ କରିଥିଲା। ଶେଷରେ 1922 ମସିହାରେ ୟୁନାଇଟେଡ୍ କିଙ୍ଗଡମ ବା ଇଂଲଣ୍ଡ ଆୟରଲାଣ୍ଡକୁ ସ୍ୱତନ୍ତ୍ର ଅଞ୍ଚଳ ରୂପେ ବା ସେଲ୍ଫ ଗଭର୍ଣ୍ଣମେଣ୍ଟ ତାଙ୍କୁ ଘୋଷଣା କରିଥିଲେ। ତାର ନାଁ ଦିଆଯାଇଥିଲା ଇରିଶ। In 1922, the United Kingdom granted the Southern Ireland self-government and the name of the Irish Free State, British colony. Next point is the British colony. United Kingdom granted her white colonies absential self-government and in 1929 called them dominions. It is called the British colony. Britain also came to the loosely call for the empire the British Commonwealth. In 1917, in Montagu Chambers for reforms proposed to the certain amount of devolution of power to the British Indian provinces in the form of diarchy, then was rejected by the major political parties in British East India Company. In 1939, the demand of dominion status which the Simon Commission refused to the granted. It is proposed to the devolution of power and the province of the power centers. भारत रे ब्रिटिश कॉलोनी स्थापित होइतला ए ब्रिटिश कॉलोनी धीरे धीरे भारत रे प्रत्येक अंश अधीनस्थ करितला जेतले मॉन्टेगु चेम्सफोर्ड रिफॉर्म्स एक्ट गोटे पास हेतला एथिरे भारत को अधिकार करिया पई एक परोक्ष भाव एक नीति प्रणयन करा जायतिला भारत राजनैतिक दल गुड या विरोध करथिले मध्य साइमन कमिशन या ग्रहण करनथिला ओलटा भारतीय मान को दमन कराइथिला तेणु गांधी को नेतृत्व रे आंदोलन कराइथिला और शेष रे ब्रिटिश मान को भारत रु बाहर कर दिया। नेक्स्ट डच फ्रेंच पोर्तुगीज बेल्जियम कॉलोनीज खाली ब्रिटिश नुहे यह व्यतीत केवल ब्रिटिश कॉलोनी नुह ब्रिटिश कॉलोनी मतलब यूरोप रो आहुरी अनेक कॉलोनी माने आसीथिले भारत रो तो डच ओलंदाज फ्रेंच ब्रिटिश पोर्तुगीज so many colonies are established in India. Finally English colony and French colony are still remain 1962 but other colonies are collapsed. The Dutch were the first colonists of Europe in course of her competition with the other European colonial powers. However, they lost much of their overseas territories and later become virtually confident of Indonesia. After the World War II, she lost control over the islands of Dutch after the Portugal freedom of movement era. डच कॉलोनी विदाय हेतले मध्य शेष रे इंडोनेशिया को मध्य डच माने ये जो अधीनस्थ रखिथिले दीर्घ दिन रखिया परे द्वितीय विश्व युद्ध परे इंडोनेशिया रु डच कॉलोनी समाप्त हेतिला। आपण जानिथिबे भारत 1947 स्वाधीनता पाइतिला किंतु भारत रो गोटिय अंश को फ्रेंच माने बहुत दिन धरि रखिथिले से अंचल कहि परिबो गोवा गोवा को फ्रेंच माने बहुत दिन धरि निज अधीन रखिथिले शेष रे 1962 मसिया रे गोवा को फ्रेंच थारु रिसीव करा जायतिला एवं फ्रेंच माने गोवा छाडी भारत चली जायतिले। Under the Fourth Republican Constitution, France called the empire the French Union with very little autonomy to her associated states. In 1954, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos Union regulating of the Indo-China Wars. तेणु फ्रांस माने वियतनाम को मध्य नीति अधीन रखिथिले काम्बोडिया लाओस भारत रो मध्य गोवा को निज अधीन रे रखिथिले। In 1958, the French Union was renamed the French Community, but the experiment failed and most of the French positions became the free by the 1960. 1960 मसीहा पर्यंत फ्रेंच रो कॉलोनी तहा एशिया महादेश देखिबा को रहितला तापर तार समाप्त घटितला। Confirmed with the freedom movement in the fire in the Congo in 1958 to 59. अफ्रीकार कंगो अंचल मध्य देखिबा को मिलितला कि बेल्जियम promised her election and extensive freedom, but serious riots forced her the grant Belgium Congo total freedom in the January 1960. Portugal, on the other hand, itself was under the dictatorship. She never tried to grant her colonies self-government and regarded them as her provinces. In 1961, Goa liberated from the India by force. After the end of the dictatorship, Portugal, her other colonies were granted freedoms. So, European आसीथिबा जो कॉलोनियल देश गुड़ाक एशिया महादेश सबुदिन लोप पाई। Next, the debate on the self-determination. Self-government and self-determination. Wilson promised to the right of the self-determination in nationalism had been kind of critics. One was the straightforward concept of who did not like the backbone of the territorial systems of the old empires. The second group of comprised of radicals who thought that Wilson's program was too limited in scope of the confined to only the Austro-Hungarian Empire and did not touch their traditional empires like the British and the French. It took the blind eyes of the entire colonial world. The third group of cities was the pragmatic one. They thought that the modern states were too such heterogeneous to allow a net streamlining of borders along with the ethnic lines. The self-determination and the succession. Right to self-determination does not mean only the national self-determination. It has a much broader communication to cover all kinds of subject people. The American Revolution 1976, for example, was in the assertion of the right of self-determination. Indian Independent Act, Independent Rule 1947, it is also the right to self-determination. There are so many self-determinations by that country who was dominated by the colonial states. In any case, right to the self-determination poses a challenge to the larger body to which it beginning the nationalist content to the demands gives it an added strength. Consequently, it is the opponent in the days of globalization the issue has acquired. The advocates of globalization consider national autonomy to be the essentially retrograde. The advocates of national sovereignty consider the global orders of essentially unequal. They consider the state right in the major shield against the global expansions. Globalization and the national questions. According to the Marxist of the national questions, arose the rise of capitalism in the Europe. Karl Marx himself thought that capitalism should eventually obliterate the nation boundary by the sheer common strength. However, the Lenin found in the nationalism the power of a fight imperialism and welcomed the collaboration of a Marxist which the nation Borges side in the colonies. This was and the result an extent of the collaboration of between the nationalist movement in the Asia and Africa, the international communist movement. ମାର୍କ୍ସିଷ୍ଟଙ୍କ ମତରେ ଏବଂ ତାଙ୍କର ଶିଷ୍ୟମାନଙ୍କ ମତରେ ଯେ ଲେନିନଙ୍କ ମତରେ ନ୍ୟାସନାଲିଷ୍ଟ ଦ ପାୱାର ଟୁ ଫାଇଟ୍ ଇମ୍ପେରିଆଲିଜମ and welcome to the collaboration of Marxist of the national Borges side. ଯେ ବର୍ଜେସ୍ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ବା କ୍ୟାପିଟାଲିଷ୍ଟ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ଧ୍ୱଂସ କରିବା ପାଇଁ ପ୍ରୋଲେଟେରିଏଟ୍ ବା ସର୍ବହରା ଗୋଷ୍ଠୀ ମାନଙ୍କର एकता ही आवश्यक बोली लेलिन मध्य प्रकाश करथिले. Summary of the topic: nationality and self-determination are interconnection. Nation is in the 19th century they were focused on the Europe. After the World War I, the focus shifted to the Asia and Africa. Because of their historically anti-imperialistic character, the Marxists supported them. The fall of the Soviet Union has led to the program of globalization that undermines the nationalist, economist, and sentiments. ଉପନିବେଶବାଦର ସମାପ୍ତ ଘଟିଲା, ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟବାଦର ସମାପ୍ତ ଘଟିଲା, ଆଧୁନିକ ଯୁଗରେ ଆଉ ଏକ ସଭ୍ୟତା ବା ଆଉ ଏକ ରାଜନୈତିକ ସ୍ଥିତି ଦେଖିବାକୁ ମିଳିଥିଲା ସାମ୍ବିଧାନିକବାଦ କନଷ୍ଟିଚ୍ୟୁସନାଲିଜିମ୍ ସମ୍ବିଧାନବାଦ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇଥିଲା, ଯୋଉଟା କି ଆଧୁନିକ ଯୁଗରେ ସମ୍ବିଧାନ ମାଧ୍ୟମରେ ଦେଶ ଗୁଡ଼ିକୁ ଶାସନ କରିବା ପାଇଁ ତାହା ଦେଖିବାକୁ ମିଳିଥିଲା। ଗଣତନ୍ତ୍ର ବ୍ୟବସ୍ଥା ଆଉ ରିପବ୍ଲିକ ବ୍ୟବସ୍ଥା ମାଧ୍ୟମରେ ସାମ୍ବିଧାନବାଦ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ହୋଇଥିଲା। ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ପ୍ରାୟତଃ ଅଧିକାଂଶ ଦେଶରେ ସମ୍ବିଧାନ ମାଧ୍ୟମରେ ଦେଶ ଗୁଡ଼ିକ ଶାସନ କରାଯାଉଛି, ତାହା ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ଦେଖିବାକୁ ମିଳୁଛି। State building by the instrumental of requirement, ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରର ଗଠନ। ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର କିପରି ଗଠନ ହେଇପାରିବ? The state building is not a simple or either. State building occurs, say Almond and Powell, when the political elite create a new structure and organization designed to penetrate the society in order to regulate behavior in it and draw a larger volume of resources from it. State building is commonly associated with the significant increases in the regulative and the extensive capitalism of the political system. It involves the determination of the structure of authority, the territorial extent of this spread, the extent of the popular conformity with the authority, and the means of securing such authority. A crucial test of the authority is the legitimacy of the people, recorded in the feeling satisfaction among the people with the role. If the government primary interest in the securing of the obedience of the next people of law and order, it interests the people lies in the preservation their right to promote the interest. ଗୋଟିଏ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରରେ ଅଧୀନରେ ରହିଥିବା ଅଧିବାସୀ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ସେ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରକର୍ତ୍ତା ନିଶ୍ଚିତ ଭାବରେ ସୁରକ୍ଷା ଦେବ, ନିରାପତ୍ତା ଦେବ ଏବଂ ସେମାନେ ଧନ ଜୀବନ ରକ୍ଷା କରିବା ପାଇଁ ତାର ବ୍ୟବସ୍ଥା ମଧ୍ୟ କରିବ। ଲ ଆଣ୍ଡ ଅର୍ଡରକୁ ଲୋକମାନଙ୍କ ନିକଟରେ ପହଞ୍ଚେଇବ ଏବଂ ସାମ୍ରାଜ୍ୟକୁ ବା ନିୟନ୍ତ୍ରଣ ମାଧ୍ୟମରେ ଲ ଆଣ୍ଡ ଅର୍ଡର ର ସାର୍ବଜନୀନ କରିବା ଉଚିତ। ହିଷ୍ଟ୍ରି ଅଫ ଦ ଷ୍ଟେଟ, ancient Greek and Rome began to city state। विशेष कर आम जो स्टेट कथा कहबा से प्लाटो एवं आरिस्टोटलଙ୍କର पुस्तक जो लेखा है पॉलिस मीन्स सिटी स्टेट, जोटा ग्रीक में व्यवहार करते। पॉलिस मीन्स सिटी स्टेट बा नगर राज्य। ग्रीस से छोट छोट नगर राज्य माध्यम शासन करते जहाँ आम से स्टेट बोली कहते। तेणु से पॉलिस शब्द बा सिविटा शब्द रु नगर राज्य सृष्टि होता। परवर्ती अवस्था पॉपुलेशन वृद्धि होगा द्वारा नगर राज्य गुड़िकर आकार, आयतन, जनसंख्या बहुत वृद्धि घटी। दि वैल्यू ऑफ द आलमंड पावल सीमा, आलमंड पावल को मतरे द एनालिटिकल वैल्यू ऑफ द आलमंड पावल is however considerable according to the author of the primitive political system handle their problem legally, a disuse of the interment wage by means of the hawk or minimal structural differences of specializations. The traditional political system were characterized by the specialized, regulative and extractive structure and by the symbolic capability intended to create the loyalty among the members of identity with the larger political system. But the problem of participation in the political system and distribution of the product were still handled difficulty. And internationally, the modern stable democracies, all these functions are sufficiently distinct. In Germany, these four processes were the almost simultaneous and spread over short period, while the Tudor Britain, the feudal lord lost their state. They were accommodated with the power and influence of the parliament and the bureaucracy. On the other hand, in Germany, feudalism was observed in the state, bureaucratic and military structure. France lay somewhere between the two models, that there the feudal aristocracy was observed in the loyal court of the diversity of power to as well the communal roles. ଜର୍ମାନୀ ହଉ ବା ଫ୍ରାନ୍ସ ହଉ, ତେଣୁ ସେ ସବୁ ଦେଶ ଗୁଡ଼ିକରେ ନଗର ରାଜ୍ୟରୁ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର, ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରରୁ ଆଧୁନିକ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ର ଦେଖିବାକୁ ମିଳିଥିଲା। ଏ ଆଧୁନିକ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରରେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ବାଉଣ୍ଡ୍ରିର ସୁରକ୍ଷା ମିଳିଗଲା, ସେତେବେଳେ ରାଜତନ୍ତ୍ର ଲୋପ ପାଇଥିଲା ଆଉ ଗଣତନ୍ତ୍ରର ଆବିର୍ଭାବ ହେଇଥିଲା। ଗଣତନ୍ତ୍ରର ଆବିର୍ଭାବ ଦ୍ୱାରା ପାର୍ଲିଆମେଣ୍ଟ ବା ସଂସଦ ମାଧ୍ୟମରେ ଦେଶ ଗୁଡ଼ିକ ଶାସିତ ହେବାକୁ ଲାଗିଥିଲା। ପାର୍ଲିଆମେଣ୍ଟର ଉଦ୍ଦେଶ୍ୟ ହେଉଛି ଏକ ସମ୍ବିଧାନ ପୁସ୍ତକ ମାଧ୍ୟମରେ ଦେଶକୁ ଶାସନ କରିବା ବା ଆଇନ କାନୁନ ମାଧ୍ୟମରେ ଦେଶକୁ ଶାସନ କରିବା ଉଦ୍ଦେଶ୍ୟ ରଖିଥାଏ ସମ୍ବିଧାନ। ସମ୍ବିଧାନ ହେଉଛି ଏକ ଆଇନ ସମ୍ବଳିତ ଏକ ପୁସ୍ତକ, ଯୋଉଥିରେ ଗୋଟେ ପର୍ଟିକୁଲାର ଦେଶରେ ନିର୍ଦ୍ଦିଷ୍ଟ ଆଇନ ସମ୍ବଳିତ ବିଷୟବସ୍ତୁକୁ ଅନ୍ତର୍ଭୁକ୍ତ କରାଯାଇଥାଏ। ସରକାର ଆସିବା ଦ୍ୱାରା ସେହି ସାମ୍ବିଧାନିକ ନୀତି ନିୟମ ଅନୁସାରେ ଶାସନ କରିଥାଏ। The literal meaning of a constitution is a way of a body is constituted and structural in political science. This would mean by why the state is the authority of a country constituted. When Aristotle wrote his Politics after the studying about 150 states, after 150 city-states in the Hellenic world and classified colonization, the politics after the studying. He was using the literal meaning of a constitution. Later value of the added up to it. ସର୍ବପ୍ରଥମେ ଆରିଷ୍ଟଟଲ ତାଙ୍କ ପୁସ୍ତକରେ ସମ୍ବିଧାନ ବା କନଷ୍ଟିଟ୍ୟୁସନ ଶବ୍ଦ ବ୍ୟବହାର କରିଥିଲେ, କାହିଁକି ନା ସେ 150ଟି ସିଟି ଷ୍ଟେଟର ସମ୍ବିଧାନକୁ ଅଧ୍ୟୟନ କଲା ପରେ ନିଜର ପୁସ୍ତକ ଦ ପଲିଟିକ୍ସକୁ ରଚନା କରିଥିଲେ। ତେଣୁ ସେ ହିଁ ସମ୍ବିଧାନ ବିଷୟରେ ସର୍ବପ୍ରଥମେ ଜ୍ଞାନ ପ୍ରଦାନ କରିଥିଲେ। Later a value added to it. A constitution is believed to have the quality of stability and responsibility to the extent that the people expect it to be followed by the members and the organs with the government. Constitution, however, is not republican as the name of a constitution monarchy word indicate. Even now in European there are dynastic monarchs who have given up their absolute authority in elected legislature. On the other hand, republicanism, that means the system headed by and the elected president, does not necessarily indicate the constitutional rule. Military leaders in the several countries have proclaimed themselves president and the often people supported by the various means of including the referenda. They have the tempted with the constitution of their countries often thrown them on the ସାମ୍ବିଧାନିକ ସରକାରରେ ସରକାର ଲୋକମାନଙ୍କ ଦ୍ୱାରା ନିର୍ବାଚିତ ହୋଇଥାନ୍ତି। ନିର୍ବାଚନ ଦୁଇ ପ୍ରକାର ହୋଇଥାଏ, ଡାଇରେକ୍ଟ ଇଲେକ୍ସନ और ଇନଡାଇରେକ୍ଟ ଇଲେକ୍ସନ। ନିର୍ବାଚନ ଦୁଇ ପ୍ରକାର ହୋଇଥାଏ, ଡାଇରେକ୍ଟ ଇଲେକ୍ସନ और ଇନଡାଇରେକ୍ଟ ଇଲେକ୍ସନ। ଡାଇରେକ୍ଟ ଇଲେକ୍ସନ ମାଧ୍ୟମରେ ଲୋକମାନଙ୍କୁ ନିର୍ବାଚିତ କରାଯାଏ, ସାମ୍ବିଧାନିକ ବ୍ୟବସ୍ଥା ଅନୁସାରେ ଶାସନ କରାଯାଏ, ଯୋଉଟା କି ସୁଇଜରଲ୍ୟାଣ୍ଡ ଦେଖିବାକୁ ମିଳିଥାଏ। ଇନଡାଇରେକ୍ଟ ଇଲେକ୍ସନ ବିଶେଷ ବ୍ୟବସ୍ଥା, ଯୋଉଟା କି ସରକାରକୁ ପରୋକ୍ଷ ଭାବରେ ଲୋକମାନେ ଭୋଟ ଦେଇ ନିର୍ବାଚିତ କରିଥାନ୍ତି ଓ ସରକାର ଗଠନ କରିଥାନ୍ତି, ଯୋଉ ବ୍ୟବସ୍ଥା ଭାରତ ଓ ପାକିସ୍ତାନ ଦେଖିବାକୁ ମିଳିଥାଏ। ତେଣୁ ସାମ୍ବିଧାନିକ ବ୍ୟବସ୍ଥା ଲୋକମାନେ ସରକାରକୁ ନିର୍ବାଚିତ କରିଥାନ୍ତି। ନିର୍ବାଚିତ ସରକାର ଆସିବା ଦ୍ୱାରା ଯେ ସରକାରଙ୍କ ତିନୋଟି ଅଙ୍ଗ ଅଛି, ଲେଜିସ୍ଲେଚର, ଏକ୍ସିକ୍ୟୁଟିଭ, ଜୁଡିସିଆର। ଗୋଟିଏ ଅଙ୍ଗ ଆଇନ ପ୍ରଣୟନ କଲା ବେଳେ ଏକ୍ସିକ୍ୟୁଟିଭ ଏହି ଆଇନକୁ କାର୍ଯ୍ୟକାରୀ କରିଥାଏ ଏବଂ ଜୁଡିସିଆଲ ବିଭାଗ ଆଇନକୁ ତର୍ଜମା କରିଥାଏ। ଏହି ତିନୋଟି ଅର୍ଗାନ ମାଧ୍ୟମରେ ସରକାର ପରିଚାଳିତ ହୋଇଥାନ୍ତି ଏବଂ ଏହି ଅଙ୍ଗ ଗୁଡ଼ିକ ସାମ୍ବିଧାନିକ ଭିତରେ ହିଁ କାର୍ଯ୍ୟ କରିଥାଏ। ସାମ୍ବିଧାନ ବାହାରେ କୌଣସି ଅଙ୍ଗ ଯାଇପାରିବ ନାହିଁ। अमेरिका रे सर्वप्रथमे आम संविधान कथा कहबा ब्रिटिश इज द मदर ऑफ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ब्रिटिश सर्वप्रथम संविधान प्रस्तुत करथिला जेतु ब्रिटिश अनरिटन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन देखियो को मिलितला सेठी केते चार्टर बा अन्य एक्ट मध्ये देखियो मिलितला तापरे अमेरिकन संविधान विश्ववासी बहुत अवदान देछि यहाँ पर इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन साउथ अफ्रीका कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन चाइना कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन स्विट्जरलैंड कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन या विश्व को बहुत किछ अवदान देछि वर्तमान प्रत्येक सभ्यतार संविधान माध्यम शासित होउछि यदि हम भारत कथा कहबा भारत एक विशाल देश विशाल बाउंड्री अछि ए विशाल बाउंड्री सर्वबृहत संविधान भारत देखिबा को मिलता है डॉक्टर बी आर आंबेडकर 395 आर्टिकल विशिष्ट एवं 12टी अनुच्छेद विशिष्ट एक बृहत संविधान प्रस्तुत करथिले ए संविधान द्वारा भारत सरकार शासन करूचंती भारत सरकार ए संविधान रो जहा लिखित होईची ए लिखित संबलित आईन माध्यम शासन करितांती जदि से संविधान बाहर को जाहांती ता अणसंवैधानिक आईन भाव ग्रहण करा जाए सुप्रीम कोर्ट ए आईन गुडी को अकामी करि दंती ओ ताहाको राष्ट्र रे परिचालन करिया पई आदेश देई न थांती से प्रत्येक राष्ट्र जो नीति नियम गुडी को होइताय व्यवस्थापिक आईन प्रणयन करिथाय ओ ताहा संवैधानिक पद्धति रे होइथाय ओ संवैधानिक नीति भितरे ही होइथाय so it is a very important organ is a constitution in modern society आज पई क्लास शेष होला हमें यूनिट 15 पर्यंत क्लास कंप्लीट कर दलु चलो
आज्ञा
यूनिट 15 पर्यंत क्लास कंप्लीट हो गला हमरो आसना काली यूनिट 16 आरंभ करबा वॉइस किछ कटु नथला तो ओके थैंक यू एवरीवन
थैंक यू सर
थैंक यू एवरीवन